England and Wales, it's a dry day with some sunny spells. Quite a grey start for Scotland and Northern Ireland with some outbreaks of rain, but even here I suspect the east of Northern Ireland, central and southern Scotland becoming drier by the afternoon. At the same time, more showers threaten to come into the southwest later on. But for much of the country, it's going to be a dry and a bright day on Saturday and still pretty mild. The winds will be lighter as well. But the showers do return through the evening, southwest England initially, then into Wales, and then more widely across western areas as we head through Saturday night and into Sunday. And that leaves us with a showery picture across most places on Sunday. Again, some heavy downpours are likely, a chance for some gusty winds, but it's always staying mild. Bye for now.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB Newsday and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB Newsday and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness, brilliant.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello, it's 1 minute past 12. Welcome to GB Newsday with me, Alastair Stewart. Well, what a day yesterday was. Liz Truss will leave Number 10 next Friday after resigning as Prime Minister, and now the sharks are circling. Will Boris Johnson return to Number 10 as the next Prime Minister? Well, allies close to him are confident that he can get the backing of the 100 MPs that he needs to get on the ballot on Monday. Or will it be his former Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, who gets the keys to Number 10 after losing to Liz Truss in that leadership election only 5 weeks away? Or is it time for Prime Minister Penny Mordaunt, set to be an absolutely hectic next few days in Westminster? And here on GB News, we'll be bringing you all of the latest twists and turns and tales in the newest saga of Tory turmoil, and we genuinely want to hear from you. So do get in touch, usual routes, gbviews at gbnews.uk, or go on Twitter. But before all of that, let's bring you right up to date with the rest of the news headlines. Here we go.
Good
afternoon, it's 2 minutes past 12. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. And as you heard there from Alistair, speculation is growing over whether Boris Johnson will make a comeback as Prime Minister. Business Secretary Jacob Rees-Mogg has become the first Cabinet Minister to back Boris. Candidates to succeed Liz Truss are yet to declare their intentions, but former Chancellor Rishi Sunak and the Leader of the House, Penny Mordaunt, are widely expected to run. Those vying for the Tory party leadership will have to secure 100 nominations from the party's 357 MPs. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says maintaining a Tory government is a risk.
The risk is not a general election. The risk is continuing with this chaos. What you've seen in the last few weeks is real damage to our economy, real damage to our reputation as a country, and people are paying the price for that, whether it's in mortgages or other things. So the risk is not changing, and there's an alternative. You can either have more of this chaos under the Conservatives or stability under a Labour government.
Well, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Ed Davey, told GB News there needs to be a general election.
I don't think any political party before has made such a mess, and the Conservative parties are totally to blame for this shambles. And, you know, I'm a patriot. I believe in my country. I want to serve my country to help people get out of this mess. And frankly, if the Conservatives were truly patriotic, they would vote for that general election so the British people could have their say.
Well, in Boris Johnson's constituency, there are mixed views on whether he should return to number 10.
I think he was good. He got us through quite a lot. And then they seemed to kick him out, and we thought it was terrible.
Yeah, I think he should bring back Boris because people stabbed him in the back.
Undecided at the moment because he made quite a mess of it the last time.
Well, I think we haven't got much of a choice. We haven't got a lot of people we can choose from.
No, definitely no Bojo. Rishi Sunak, that's our favourite choice.
MP Christian Matheson has resigned from the Labour Party following allegations of serious sexual misconduct. It's after the party suspended his whip and asked him to stand down. An independent parliamentary panel had recommended he be suspended from the Commons after the Commissioner for Standards upheld 2 allegations against him by a former member of staff. Political instability in the UK is causing concern in Australia, with the country's Prime Minister worried about possible delays to the free trade deal. Anthony Albanese, who's only been in office himself for 5 months, said he's already met 2 British Prime Ministers and will be speaking to a third soon. He wants to make sure conversations with Liz Truss about the trade deal will still be on it.
I had discussed with Prime Minister Truss the fast-tracking of that. We discussed trying to get it concluded before the end of this year to make sure that the appropriate parliamentary processes went through our respective parliaments. And I will, of course, speak to whoever it is that will become the next Prime Minister.
The pound is again sliding against the dollar as government debt continues to climb. The Chancellor has promised to do whatever is necessary to fix finances after borrowing rose to £20 billion last month. Jeremy Hunt says he wants to ensure taxpayers' money is well spent following a spike in debt interest due to inflation. That as high street stores are feeling the pinch, with the latest figures showing another sales slump last month. Retail sales fell by 1.4%, which is much worse than analysts expected. The Office for National Statistics says food stores saw the biggest drop, with sales falling by 1.8%. The figures reflect ongoing concerns about the cost of living, as well as shop closures during the Queen's state funeral. Elsewhere, US intelligence suggests Iran has military experts training Russians in occupied Crimea. They're said to be there to teach them how to use Iranian-made drones. Both countries are denying the allegations. On Monday, the devices were used to launch an attack on the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. Ukraine claims they were deployed by Russia. And a sexual assault claim against actor Kevin Spacey has been dismissed by a New York court. The civil case was brought by Anthony Rapp, who accused the Oscar-winning actor of making an unwanted advance in 1986 when he was just 14 years old. Spacey will face a criminal trial in London next year, where he faces 5 separate charges following alleged assaults between 2005 and 2013. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Alistair.
Rhiannon, thank you very much indeed. And to all of you, a very good afternoon. There is a fight on for the leadership of the Conservative Party, with a spectacular prize awaiting the winner. Do you know, that's almost a cut-and-paste statement these days in the news industry. Although, given what's going on, you might genuinely ask, as some of those people did in Rhiannon's news bulletin, why anybody still really wants it. Meanwhile, the right are calling for a realignment, but historically, that can often help the right's enemies just as much as the right. Labour, meantime, again, as you heard there, and also the Liberal Democrats, are calling for a general election, when in truth that cannot be brought about unless lots of Tory MPs defect. We certainly live in interesting times, and we here will have all of the developments over the next 3 hours, and we'll try to put it in context for you, and we also genuinely want to hear from you. Usual way, gbviews at gbnews.uk, or tweet me or tweet at gbnews. I'm here for the next 3 hours, and delighted to say I am joined with old chums and new, Benedict Spence, political commentator and journalist, and one of the newer faces on GB News, with whom I haven't worked before, but I'm delighted to start today, and that's Olivia Utley, who is GB News' new political correspondent. So let us start with you, and I'm always intrigued as we try and guide folks through on TV and radio what is actually going on. You're both there with your phones. I've got my phone. So much of this is happening on social media. Boris Johnson's on the plane, in the air, heading here. People are supporting him, says on social media. Then they go back on social media, say, oh, I haven't quite made my mind up yet. How do you see the lie of the land right now in terms of runners and riders, Olivia?
Well, it seems pretty clear that Rishi Sunak is going to put his name forward. He seems to be, as far as I can tell, the favourite. Then you've also got Boris Johnson, who is on his way back from the Caribbean and is, almost astonishingly, you might think, shoring up quite a lot of support. There are plenty of MPs who may not particularly like Boris, were annoyed with him over the Partygate saga, may not even like what he stands for, but they're in survival instinct mode now. And Boris Johnson is an election winner, and they are now pinning their hopes on the person, the only person who they think might be able to guide us through this chaos and win the Conservatives a general election, whenever that might be. Also in the fray, of course, we've got Penny Mordaunt, who is, as we all know, pretty ambitious. I'm hearing that there were talks about her and Rishi forming some sort of coalition, of running on a joint ticket, but she doesn't seem to have very much interest in that at all, and I'm not sure if Rishi does either. So it's possible that she throws her name in the ring as a third candidate. Then we've got what happens next week. Very up in the air. We could have a new Prime Minister at any point between Monday and Friday. It's possible, I've heard that up to 150 Tory MPs are backing Rishi Sunak, which might mean that he's the only one, if the rest of the votes split, to get enough MP nominations, has to be 100, to get through, which would mean he'd win automatically. So I think that's where, complicated, but I think that's where the lie of the land is.
If it does, Benedict, go all the way through to having two, possibly even three candidates, which is kind of the Conservative Parliamentary Party divided by three.
Yeah.
So arithmetically, it's at least possible. There's a big argument. There was a fascinating discussion on the previous programme about the legality of it, of whether the members are, whether the Conservative body risks giving the members a say. Yeah. I mean, the members love Boris. And for similar reasons do not like Rishi. Yeah. Very divided on Penny Mordaunt because of things like gender assignment and lose for various people and this, that and the other. But the party as a whole seems to be trying to find a legally watertight way of keeping the membership at arm's length.
It is, but that's a very dangerous route.
Yeah,
to go down,
absolutely.
is the thing. I mean, let's be honest here. Conservative Party members do not join out of the goodness of their own heart. They join in order to have a say in who gets to be leader of their party. That's the big prize on offer, or of handing over your membership fee. And I tell you what, if, let's say hypothetically, that it doesn't actually go to the members, then you'll have had a Prime Minister that was elected by the general public, you will have then had a Prime Minister elected by the members, and then you will have had a Prime Minister appointed by the MPs.
Yes.
Ultimately, how does that go down with the electorate at the next general election? How on earth do you sell that? No matter how well this next Prime Minister does, how do you come across and say, oh, yes, we're open to the principles of democracy, everybody, we want this to be the case? The Labour Party will have a field day with that. They'll go, this is a party that is slowly becoming more and more about coronations and anointing people. It doesn't even care about its own members. It doesn't even trust its own members. So how on earth can you trust this party? So whilst I understand they want that because, speed up the process, or sotto voce to keep Boris Johnson out, because the odds are if he gets into that runoff situation, he would probably win. That's a really difficult one to try and square, actually, ultimately.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a risk that they can actually take.
Yeah. And your thoughts, Olivia, if you'd be so good, on the performance of the principal players in His Majesty's opposition now. We heard Sir Keir Starmer and Ed Davey in Rhiannon's bulletin, and also last night and throughout this morning we've been hearing from Nicola Sturgeon as well, the constant refrain of, we want a general election, we want it now. And that, to be fair, there's a lot of support for that on social media as well, and I suspect not only from Labour and Liberal Democrat and SNP supporters. Truth of the matter is they can do absolutely zero squat about it unless they get a big old chunk of Tory MPs defecting and supporting them in a no-confidence vote.
That's true. The other option, I suppose, is that, yes, you have a party which just becomes completely ungovernable. It's possible that there are so many Tory leadership candidates that none of them get 100 votes, and then you get to a stage where you are looking at a general election. The other way, of course, is to just put lots and lots of pressure on the Conservative government to try and make it abundantly clear that there is no democratic mandate for whichever Prime Minister and government takes over now. This would be uncharted territory because obviously in the past we've had a Prime Minister elected in the general election, then they've been replaced by someone who wasn't elected, but they can claim they still have the mandate and they've inherited the mandate. But we've never seen it, that it's been passed twice over. Yeah. So there is, Labour can make a good case that there is a democratic case for a general election. At the moment, the Conservatives are at the lowest they've ever been, the lowest any political party has ever been in the polls. This morning I saw 14%, yeah. And there are people saying it's astonishing that even 14% of people...
I think 14 is the number that comes up in our People's polling, which we commissioned for GB News. We'll be talking to David Cowling about that a little bit later on in this programme. But yeah, absolutely. And also, the standout word in all of it is shambles.
Shambles, absolute shambles. And at the moment, Keir Starmer, Nicola Sturgeon too, to an extent, all they have to really do is sit there and not be the Conservative Party to get a lot of support. On the other hand, we could see a general election campaign. Annalise Dodds was tweeting last night about Labour's plan for LGBTQI inclusion, which includes some quite unpopular things in the country about gender-critical issues. So, we could see that the Starmer riding high at the moment could, in the pressure of a general election campaign, start to crumble. At the moment, it's very hard to see how a general election could end in a Conservative victory, though. Yeah.
Well, OK, for the time being, do go. I mean, carry on checking on the firms. You too, Benedict, because I want you popping back in and again as the conversation develops with any runners and riders, any confirmation of MPs arriving at various airports, whatever it may be, we shall spot it and we shall seek to analyse it. I'm delighted to be joined now live by Tom Harwood, political correspondent, and there he is outside number 10 Downing Street. So, Tom, you have your own intelligence sources as well. The view here in the studio is that it may be that one of the candidates gets enough for it to be a coronation, as I think you were tweeting about yesterday, or it may be that there are so many candidates doing terribly well that the membership have a final say and it all goes completely nuts again.
Well, that's exactly the case. I attended the press conference yesterday with Sir Graham Brady and Jake Berry, who announced these rules, co-agreed between the 1922 committee executive, but also the party board, trying to ensure that there may well be an element of party democracy here. But there is a crucial conditional, something that hasn't happened before in any Conservative leadership party election, and that is an indicative vote of members of Parliament. That means that if indeed two members of Parliament get past that 100-person nomination threshold, a very, very high nomination threshold designed to curtail this process, truncate this process into a very short period of time, if two people get through, then, or well, I should say, if three people get through, that's the maximum that could, given the numbers in the party, then there's another round and they get two people, then there would be a further round, but it wouldn't count. Yes, this further round would be members of Parliament, Conservative members of Parliament, choosing a winner and announcing that winner in terms of who the party would have backed were it their choice. And then for the following 4 days, it goes to the Conservative Party membership. They vote online. But here's the really crucial thing. They'll be able to see how MPs voted. They'll be able to know the MP preference between those final two, something that we haven't known in actual fact in the last leadership contest. All of the candidates got around a third. Rishi Sunak just over a third. Liz Truss a smidgen over a third. Penny Mordaunt just under a third. Similarly, of course, in previous leadership elections, you only get to the final three and then the next two go on to the membership. This time, there will be that indicative vote, and that may well change the dynamics if indeed it does go on to a vote of the membership.
One other issue, and Olivia's just pointed out to me some not insignificant breaking news, and that is that the Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, has confirmed what an awful lot of folk that I suspect we've all been chatting to had been hearing, and that was that Ben Wallace is not going to throw his hat or his tin helmet or whatever defence secretaries wear these days, and we're showing pictures of him there right now for those people listening to our conversation on radio. Ben Wallace, who way back was something of a favourite, and then at the last moment said, no, I'm not going to do it, and he's now said again he's not going to do it, which takes us to my next question to you, Tom, and that is all the talk of little deals, and Olivia talked about this earlier. OK, so, you know, Rishi gets to be Prime Minister, but Penny gets to be Foreign Secretary, or so-and-so stays as Chancellor of the Exchequer. None of that has got any traction at all. There is a desire within this party to have a punch-up, to have a battle, to have an election.
Yes, there is that desire. However, they may well accidentally stumble into some sort of coronation. We keep describing all of the different numbers, and by most counts, Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson have around 50 declared supporters each, or just over. Penny Mordaunt a little bit further behind. But let's remember, none of these candidates have actually declared yet. There are no formal candidates in this election. There are just MPs who are saying they're likely to back one person or the other. So it could all crumble by Monday. It could be that Boris Johnson chooses not to stand and that the deal is done and Rishi Sunak becomes Prime Minister with barely a vote at all and certainly not a vote of the membership. That is a possibility. But of course, all of these dealings will be being done behind closed doors in the coming days. I can't tell you the number of MPs that I've spoken to who've said, well, I've had to cancel my weekend plans, I'm staying down in Westminster. After all, there is a lot going on as we speak. These are the crucial hours where those crucial deals are done or indeed not done, and that will be incredibly consequential. But just to focus for a moment on Ben Wallace, of course, in the last leadership election this year, blimey, 2 leadership elections in a year, it feels a bit like 1974 with its 2 general elections. But with Ben Wallace over the summer, he said that he believed he had a very important job to do. He needed to stay in post and stay focused on the defence of the realm. And it's interesting, I've just come from a lobby briefing with the Prime Minister's official spokesman. Yes, we do still have a government, just about, announcing what indeed the Prime Minister will be doing in these coming days. Working from Downing Street today, off at Chequers this weekend, but sticking to that convention that no new policy will be announced in her remaining days as Prime Minister. And that means something rather substantial. We were expecting at least 3 packages of supply-side reform to come next week in advance of that 31st of October announcement, that fiscal statement, medium-term fiscal plan. Now we've had confirmation from Number 10 that those packages, those reforms that Liz Truss had been planning, had been wanting to deliver, they will now not be coming next week. It will be a rather emptier parliamentary calendar.
Tom, thank you very much indeed. We'll keep in touch with you, and I'm sure talk to you again before we get up to 3 o'clock when I hand over to Arlene. But for the time being, thank you very much indeed. Tom Harwood down there at Number 10. 22, nearly 23 minutes past 12. Still in the studio with me now, I'm delighted to say, Olivia Utley and also Benedict Spence. Almost a throwaway line there, but an interesting one. How many MPs have been saying to Tom, oh, I'm going to stay in Westminster, you know, there's so much going on, this, that and the other. That means they are not going back to their constituencies to take soundings and talk to the people who will either renominate them or not renominate them come that election that you alluded to.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting because, you know, you can make a good argument that actually, although a constituency, if only MPs are choosing who the Prime Minister is, it's a smaller group, obviously, than if the members are choosing. You could argue that it's more democratic because MPs are elected by their constituents and are supposed to be representing their constituents. If they're not speaking to their constituents, that could seriously affect the result. It's not clear how popular Boris Johnson still is in the party. If they're just spending the weekend in Westminster talking to each other, we could see a very, very different result. It's quite interesting now. I'm watching some quite heavy-hitting MPs declare on Twitter who they're going to support. Ben Wallace, obviously, who is an absolute darling among the Tory membership. And in focus group after focus group, we've seen people say that they want Ben Wallace. If not Ben Wallace, then no one.
Yeah.
He's leaning towards Boris Johnson, he says, which is very interesting indeed. And then on the other side, you've got Jessie Norman, who's a very well-respected figure in the Conservative Party, big brain of the Conservative Party, married, incidentally, to Kate Bingham. No, that's
Jake Berry.
Jake Berry, yeah.
Sorry, I beg your pardon.
Testing me there.
Oh, no, Kate Berry.
Kate Bingham,
who was the vaccine supremo.
Exactly. He has said that it would be absolutely catastrophic if Boris Johnson became Prime Minister. So I think, yes, we're going to see MPs talking amongst each other, listening to these influential characters, but perhaps not listening so much to their own constituents.
Yeah. And that also speaks to the red wall thing. Is that still a factor as well? Because, I mean, the urban myth has it that you know, Boris was the red wall knocker-downer.
Yes. As to whether or not anybody else can speak to that sort of constituency, I'm not really sure. That's the issue, I suppose, with all of this, is that the Conservative Party won the last general election on an entirely new sort of platform of voters, and he was trying to sort of marry these two quite disparate groups together. And it's very much an untested thing whether or not they have any other candidates who can replicate that. I think there's a lot of assumptions that Rishi Sunak can't. And I mean, I know he's very unpopular right now, but actually, for a time, he was a very popular politician. It's entirely possible he would be able to row that back.
Sure.
But I think that's a lot of where this is coming from. The support for Boris is, well, he was able to do this once, and we can't find a so-called unity candidate to do this again. It's also worth bearing in mind there will be the odd MP who is wanting to put Boris Johnson back in place with one eye on the next general election, thinking if he crashes and burns, this might actually finish him off. It's not a large number, but they do exist within the Conservative Party.
Which is a crazy place at the moment in virtually every conceivable respect. Olivia and Benedict, thank you both very much indeed. Lots more still to come, including the results of that GB News People's poll that Olivia and I were talking about just a few moments ago on who voters would like to see as the next Prime Minister. And we will also be out and about in Boris Johnson's constituency and one or two other constituencies to do that crucial thing, see if his own voters would like him to have a second crack at Downing Street. But before that, we're going to take a quick break.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB Newsday and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
And welcome back. You're watching GB Newsday with me, Alastair Stewart, and an array of brilliant, well-informed guests who are all heads down in laptops and mobile phones, because you will not miss a thing. If you thought just before the break that picture of Carrie and Boris Johnson and an aeroplane with them back in the UK, sorry, should have explained, that was just some picture to remind you of what Boris Johnson and Carrie Johnson look like. But we do think that they are currently in the air, winging their way back from that holiday in the Bahamas to launch his leadership bid following Liz Truss's dramatic resignation. Jacob Rees-Mogg has tweeted the slogan, "Boris or bust." One potential fly in the appointment, however, is Boris Johnson's own seat. It's a marginal that he won by just 7,000 votes. So let's go live now to that constituency, Uxbridge, and get reaction from the people in the town. And there, one of my favourite reporters who knows Uxbridge better almost than anybody, apart from those who actually live in Uxbridge, it's Alice Porter, our London reporter. They're back in the spotlight, poor things, again. What are you picking up? Any change? Last time you and I spoke about this, you said there was a very pro-Boris buzz still there on the streets of Uxbridge. Anything changed?
Well, Alistair, I thought my days of coming to Uxbridge would be a distant memory when Boris Johnson left as Prime Minister, but obviously that is not the case. I've been back here speaking to people, and look, it's always hard trying to get a sense of how people are feeling in a particular area, but I've had a lot of people coming up to me and saying, we're backing Boris, we want him back, and that's reflected in the number of MPs who've also shown their support to Boris Johnson as well, 24 at the last count, and we've just heard in the last 20 minutes or so from Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, who said he's leaning towards Boris Johnson. And I suppose one of the assets that he'll be the only person who can argue that he has a mandate by the people and for the people, and that's what people have been coming up and saying to me, and many of them say, you know, he was stabbed in the back, we elected him, and I suppose that really is going to be quite key if he does choose to come back, is that he's the only one who can say that, but then he also is the only one who's being investigated about whether he misled Parliament over various lockdown parties, so that certainly won't go in his favour. I was out and about speaking with people this morning about what they think about Boris Johnson, about whether he should make a comeback, and this is what they had to say.
He was quite strong. He was good. I think he was good. He got us through quite a lot. And then they seemed to kick him out, and we thought it was terrible.
Yeah, I think he should bring back Boris because people stabbed him in the back, and you can't trust Rishi to be the Prime Minister.
Undecided at the moment because he made quite a mess of it the last time, and that was the reason he went, obviously.
Well, I think we haven't got much of a choice. We haven't got a lot of people we can choose from, and at least he did try and aim for the common people. And at the moment, I think the working class common people need somebody that's going to be trying to do something for them. And although he, people had a go at him for other things, I think he did try his best in the circumstances that we had.
No, definitely no Bojo. Rishi Sunak, that's our favourite choice. Let's see. He will make it to as a new PM. Let's see.
And why Rishi over Boris?
Well, obviously we have seen the Bojo's this for a few years. Obviously, he hasn't done a great job. Now the Rishi Sunak is upcoming one. He has worked as a chancellor and he has done a great job. So hopefully, and he will make it as a new PM.
The views of some of the people in Uxbridge speaking to me just then. So it may be a case for some people here that it's a bit of the devil that you know. But on the other hand, the really key question is, even if Boris Johnson is to come back, would he be in a stronger position than last time, or would he be in a weaker position? And what crucially would happen in around 18 months' time with the general election? Somewhere like here in Uxbridge, one of the big factors for people voting in that last election was Brexit. Well, where does that leave the party now when the cost of living is going to be an issue for so many people? And this has been a traditionally safe Tory seat ever since it was first created. But as you were just saying there earlier, Alistair, Boris has not won by sizable majorities in the last few elections. And back in 2017, he only won by just over 5,000. Well, that was the smallest of any sitting Prime Minister since 1924. So I think the real question is whether this sort of what we've seen over the last few weeks, the political turmoil, there will, of course, be someone at the end of that who will be rise amongst the other Conservatives and end up being leader. But the real question is, are they going to be one to unite the party and unite the country in the next general election?
Alice, always great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for that news gathering and instinctive interpretation there in Uxbridge. And I'm sorry, you will almost certainly have to spend even more time in Uxbridge as the story unfolds. As I said, we're out and about. That was Alice in Uxbridge. A little bit later on in the programme, we'll be in East Anglia, seeing what the good folk of Liz Truss's constituency make of what's happened, and the prospect, I suppose, of seeing a little more of her than they did while she was briefly Prime Minister. You are indeed watching and listening to GB Newsday with me, Alastair Stewart. Still to come this afternoon, we'll have more on the race for number 10. We'll also be looking at some absolutely intriguing numbers about it all with our great number cruncher, David Cowling. All of that to come, but first let's bring you right up to date with all the rest of the news headlines. Here's Rhiannon Jones.
Thank you, Alistair. It's 12:35. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Speculation is growing over whether Boris Johnson will make a comeback as Prime Minister. Business Secretary Jacob Rees-Mogg has become the first Cabinet Minister to back Boris. Candidates to succeed Liz Truss are yet to declare their intentions, but former Chancellor Rishi Sunak and the Leader of the House, Penny Mordaunt, are widely expected to run. Those vying for the Tory party leadership will have to secure 100 nominations from the party's 357 MPs. MP Christian Matheson has resigned from the Labour Party following allegations of serious sexual misconduct. It's after the party suspended his whip and asked him to stand down. An independent parliamentary panel had recommended he be suspended from the Commons after the Commissioner for Standards upheld 2 allegations against him by a former member of staff. The pound is again sliding against the US dollar as government debt continues to climb. The Chancellor has promised to do whatever is necessary to fix finances after borrowing rose to £20 billion last month. Jeremy Hunt says he wants to ensure taxpayers' money is well spent following a spike in debt interest due to inflation. And high street stores are also feeling the pinch, with the latest figures showing another sales slump last month. Retail sales fell by 1.4%, which is much worse than analysts expected. The Office for National Statistics says food stores saw the biggest drop, with sales falling by 1.8%. The figures reflect ongoing concerns about the cost of living, as well as shop closures during the Queen's state funeral. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Alistair will be back in just a moment.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB Newsday and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello and welcome back. 22 minutes to 1. You're watching me, Alistair Stewart, with GB Newsday here on GB News TV and radio. We are mulling over, amongst other things, what on earth is going on within the Conservative Party, what on earth is going on within the body politic and all the rest of it. Anything that happens, we'll be right across it and bringing you analysis, reaction, facts and figures just as quickly as we can get them. Also, be delighted to be joined by a range of those that really do know, including some who are at the real front of the whole battle. And one of them is Royston Smith, who I've known for a long time, Conservative Member of Parliament for Southampton Itchen. And there he is. Good to talk to you. Thanks for finding time for us this Friday afternoon. Do you yourself see any way out of this mess for your party?
Well, there's only one way that I can see out of this, Alistair, and that is that the party finally put their self-interest aside and start thinking of what is best for the party, because by doing that, it'd be what is best for the country. We need no more people deciding on how we're going to govern this country based merely on whether or not they get a job in government.
Well, that was the absolutely caustic analysis, wasn't it, from Charles Walker, the backbencher, about I hope they feel good about having got their jobs and a seat around the cabinet and their pretty little leather boxes. Nobody's officially declared yet, but as my friends in the studio were saying, it looks pretty obvious that Rishi's going to be in the game. Penny will probably be in the game. Boris is taking soundings, if you can do that at 30,000 feet, coming back from the Caribbean. Your vote matters crucially. Is there any candidate at the moment that you think takes you closer, given that analysis, it's what's best for the country right now? Does any of them tick your box, Royston?
Well, just to take a step back to the summer when I decided I would take no part in what I felt was a self-indulgent race for number 10. You know, I didn't think the candidates then were materially better than the one that we had. And I still feel like that to some degree. However, what I am and what I've always been, and I was to Liz Truss in her short tenure in number 10, is loyal to the Prime Minister. So the one that we get, I will be completely loyal to. I haven't yet decided who I might support, but what I do know is my constituents were disappointed when Boris was kicked out, and they are contacting me now in number saying that in the event that Boris puts his hat into the ring, that is the one that they would want to see. That's not the same in every constituency, I concede that, but it's certainly what a lot of my constituents are telling me today.
How fascinating. Well, we will feed that into the number crunching as well, Royston. And I hear very clearly your analysis earlier on. The most disloyal thing, I guess, that anybody in the Conservative Party at the moment who's looked at any of the opinion polls could call for would be a general election. But you have a respect for our democracy. You always have done when we've discussed these matters in the past. And you said at the very beginning what mattered most was the interest of the country. I wonder if you go along with that analysis from various very thoughtful political analysts who say the best thing the Conservative Party could have at the moment would be a period of opposition that in a way would be like a period of rehab. Sort yourselves out, figure out what you really stand for, get out of government, let the other lot have a go for a wee while.
Well, I mean, my instinct is to say that that would not be the case, but I think there is a strong argument for that. I don't think it's the right argument. I think that you can make either way the argument. We are a grown-up party going through some trouble, some turmoil, some challenges. We can put it right. The people that I know that I see every day when I go to work in Parliament are capable of putting this right. However, I think the people that have made this analysis to you have a point, and the point is this: if these grown-ups in the room can't put it right now, if they can't do what I've done with successive prime ministers, and I haven't chosen any of the last three, if they can't do what I've done and support whoever comes into number 10 by the end of next week, then perhaps we really do need a general election, and perhaps it's those people that need to be swept out of power for a while, because we need to come together in the national interest. And I'm tired of all this navel-gazing.
Absolutely fascinating, bolting that, again, candid answer to your very first answer, which was about the national interest. I'm tending towards that position as well. One final point I'd like your genuine, equally candid comment upon, and that is the suggestion that last time round, and hear what you say about you not voting but showing support for Liz when she won and became Prime Minister, that Liz-Rishi struggle was supposed to be about the soul, the intellectual heart of the party. Liz won, offering tax cuts, dash for growth, smaller state, very traditional, right of the party. Rishi was very steady as she goes, don't do anything, don't frighten the horses and what have you. Is that a schism that still needs to be tested?
Well, I actually think that has been tested. I think that there are lots of people that thought that some of the things that Liz Truss was suggesting were good things. Lower taxes, growth, taking taxes off business is a good thing to do if we want people to be employed and employed in good, decent, high-paying jobs. However, that has been tested now, and people think that that was too much, too quickly. And although that should always be an ambition and an aspiration for a Conservative and a Conservative government, you have to pick the moment when you can bring in those sorts of policies. So I think that boil, if you like, has been lanced, at least for the time being.
All right, Royston, great to talk to you genuinely, and well done on the result the other night. A win after a little bit of time of waiting for mutual Southampton Football Club supporters there. Have a great weekend. Thank you very much indeed, Royston Smith there. Joining me live now also from Westminster, I'm thrilled to say, is George Eustis. He is seconding Rishi Sunak, himself a former member of the Cabinet, Environment, Agriculture and all such matters when working with Boris Johnson. George, great for you to find time for us on what I'm sure is a phenomenally busy time. Seconding Rishi, but so that clearing something up for me and everybody else listening, Rishi is definitely 100% confirmed a runner. How close are you to having the crucial 100 supporters?
Well, look, I should be clear. Each candidate needs 100 nominations at least, and I'm going to be one of those 100 nominations. I've already been clear that I'm going to sign that nomination today as soon as those papers become available. But I am confident that Rishi will get the number to be able to stand. He obviously had around 160 members of the parliamentary party at the final round last time. He commanded the biggest amount of support in the parliamentary party. And for me, as somebody who was actually very loyal to Boris Johnson right to the end, I didn't resign from his government. I supported him to the bitter end. I went out on media rounds to defend him day in, day out. But I don't think we can turn back. You know, the truth is, probably around 2/3 of the Conservative Party, as recently as July, were ready to vote against Boris Johnson on a vote of no confidence. That's why he had to go. And I don't see a route by which he could reunite the party from that position. But I think that Rishi really can. He's got good judgment, and he had the strongest base of support in the parliamentary party last time.
The man who did lead the rebellion against Boris Johnson. I mean, it was a fiercely fought contest for that crown between him and Sajid in terms of the resignations. But you're now backing the man who did what you have just said proudly you didn't do. You stood like Royston Smith, loyal to the leader, whoever it was at the time. Rishi led the charge. Everybody knew what he was doing about. He couldn't win. He's now back in for another go. And you're backing him.
Well, absolutely, because the right thing to do, always in this situation, is to back the person who's the right candidate to do the job. And, you know, politics is a cut and thrust business. Boris Johnson resigned from Theresa May's cabinet and sided against David Cameron in the referendum. You know, in politics, people have strong convictions on important issues and they take positions. Sometimes it means they have to upset friends. But it's a very difficult job to do, being Prime Minister. It's not easy. Lots of people covet the job. Very few can do it really well. David Cameron did it very well, and I think Rishi Sunak will too. He's got good judgment, and I think he can really, he's the right person to have in these very, very difficult times that we're facing.
Very honest answer, George, and taken on board. Quick one before I let you back. And I'm sorry if I misrepresented. I thought you were kind of number 2 in the campaign, but I take your point about seconding his nomination papers, and thank you for that clarity. Let me just put to you, I don't know whether you heard Royston Smith, your partner who represents Southampton Itchen, was talking just immediately before you. And in effect, I don't want to put words into Royston's mouth because he's a good man, he can speak perfectly well for himself, but in effect said, you know, it's not a stupid thing to say that maybe what your great party needs is a period in opposition to purge itself of the backstabbers, the disloyalists, to find out what it really stands for, and then come back clean, good charge, and then maybe form a government. Royston was implying you don't actually deserve to be in government at the moment, George.
Well, I don't agree with that, and I'm somebody who was an advisor to both Michael Howard and David Cameron and worked 100 hours a week for a number of years to try to dig the Conservative Party out of the dog days of opposition. And I can tell my colleagues you don't want to go back to opposition. It's like a lobster pot. Very easy to get into, very difficult to get out of once you're there. Of course, opposition parties will say we should go in opposition and they will call for general elections. But for me, we've got an opportunity now to choose a new leader who's got the competency and the skills and the judgment to be a good Prime Minister. The candidate is there. He enjoys the largest amount of support in the parliamentary party. It's Rishi Sunak, and we just need to get him installed, get him in place next week, and then we can start to deal with these challenges, and things might look very different come the next election.
All right, George, great to talk to you, genuinely. Always a pleasure, and thanks for finding time for us this Friday afternoon, and keep in touch with us. You're always welcome here on GB News. George Eustis there, the former Environment and Agriculture sector, talking to us live from Westminster, saying, no, we don't want a period of opposition. We want Rishi Sunak. We want a good, clean start with a clean pair of hands. Sitting in the studio with me, Benedict Spence and Olivia Utley. Two fascinating interviews with Royston Smith down there from Southampton and then from George Eustis from Westminster. Royston first. Period of opposition might not be crazy for the Conservative Party at the moment.
No, it's very interesting. And I think what Royston was sort of alluding to there is the fact that the Conservative Party is incredibly split. And I think it's easy to talk about it as though it's all about the personalities, as though it's the Rishi-ites hate the Johnsonites and they've just come up against each other. But it's much deeper than that. We saw during the leadership election over the summer that there are hugely different opinions about taxation and the way the economy should be run. But there are wildly different opinions in the Conservative Party about social issues too, which weren't really raised over this election campaign, but may be raised now. You've got sort of Steve Baker and the Liz Trussites of the party, who are very, very socially liberal. So we heard Steve Baker yesterday saying that on social issues he thinks he's slightly to the left of Keir Starmer. And obviously Liz Truss used to be a Lib Dem MP. Then you've got on the completely other end of the spectrum people like Danny Kruger, Miriam Cates, Suella Braverman will probably fit in there too, who are obviously would like low taxes, have a sort of Thatcherite vision, but are much less concerned about that compared to traditional small c Conservative values, bringing back grammar schools, upholding our institutions, etc. And that's very, very different to the sort of libertarian wing of the party.
Yeah.
And I think
mean, the thing I heard most from people, though, on the economics of the Libertarian manifesto, as it were, is that there was nothing wrong with what Liz and Kwasi tried to do in that budget, other than not doing the groundwork, not doing the sell, and not explaining it to people. The economics were sound. It was the sell.
Yes. And I've heard that from many Conservative MPs as well, although there are some who feel as though it was just going too far too soon, and the idea of having to make cuts to pay for those sort of tax cuts would be damaging for the institutions. I think the fact it's always been a broad church, obviously, the Conservative Party, but it now feels so split that perhaps only a period of opposition could be enough to realign them.
We shall see. Benedict, I'm going to come to you in a minute, because lovely David Cowling has joined us now, as promised a little earlier. And maybe after you've heard what David has had to say. The reason David Cowling is here is because the GB News People's Poll has been published this morning. Let's take a very quick look, first of all, at some of the main points within that poll. On this week's polling, we asked who people would vote for if there were to be a general election. And of the people polled, we found that 53% of voters would favour a Labour administration, as opposed to 14%. That's the lowest ever figure, as Olivia was saying a little earlier on, still supporting the Conservatives. We also asked who in 2019, amongst the 2019 Conservative voters, would prefer who they would prefer as the next Prime Minister, with Boris Johnson leading the polls by 38% to Rishi Sunak, second place at 20%. And finally, we found the word shambles was what came to mind when people hear of the Conservative Party. Just what's the word that first comes to your mind when you hear the words Conservative Party? And up shot shambles. Joining me live in the studio, as I said a moment ago, is David Cowling, who is our resident expert on all of these numbers. So 53% of voters would favour Labour, as opposed to 14% for the Tories. Down it goes, down it goes, down it goes. But I want to put one thing to you from my two interviews with Royston Smith and also with George Eustis, and also the point that Alice picked up upon in the Uxbridge constituency, is Boris Johnson is the only candidate who can claim to have a genuine democratic mandate, because he won in 2019 and he won the most seats, big majority. All of the others can't make that claim. Only Johnson can.
I'm sure the point is absolutely correct, but I think it's one of those moments where one might say, well, the constitutionists amongst us could have a fascinating discussion around the pub table, but it does ignore the fact that Johnson wasn't sacked by the British public, in effect, because he was popular. I mean, he brought the Conservative Party down, the Conservative figures were tumbling. So he didn't go on a great lot of success. He went because they perceived him to be toxic to the Conservative Party. So, yes, indeed, in terms of who has the mandate, certainly. But the more interesting, the more important, the more fundamental question for the Conservative Party is the one that you've been jockeying with colleagues all this time. Who actually is the one who can pull off this extraordinary venture that it would be for the Conservatives to turn around their potential, their current position? And you mentioned shambles.
Yeah.
These are words that people were invited to use about the Conservative Party. And there were others. Shambles, useless, incompetent, chaos, rubbish. Rather sounded like my school reports. but for a government, that is appalling.
Particularly economic competence going out of the window is one thing.
Oh, absolutely.
But also shambles. It kind of underlies George Eustis's very, very honest answer about who he was supporting, and he was supporting Rishi Sunak, who comes out ahead of the game within this poll. And George saying, I very proudly remained loyal throughout to Boris. I didn't put the knife in. Rishi did, as did Sad Javid, put the knife in very clearly. That underlines a big schism in the Conservative Party, is that the grown-up MPs who know what's best for us, poor little things that we are, may well go down the Rishi road, as per your analysis. But out in Uxbridge and around the country, they didn't judge him to be incompetent, dragging the party down, a cause of chaos, this, that and the other. They still love him, for better or for worse.
That's true, but I suspect that with the timetable we've been given, that the members aren't going to get a look in on this. And the fundamental question is, and it doesn't require a Nobel Prize in mathematics, just look at the figures in our poll. 53% Labour, 14% Conservative, merely 3 points ahead of the Lib Dems. If members of a party in Parliament cannot confront those figures and say, excuse me, maybe I've been indulging myself a little here. Maybe I will have to embrace a candidate who doesn't represent my wing of the party, but who can get us out of this gigantic hole. Now, if there are not sufficient members of the Conservative Parliamentary Party who will make that decision to put the future of the party, let alone the country, ahead of their own personal preferences, then they really are in a handcart to hell.
Yeah. And as Isabel Hardman said, joining a goodly queue for a period in rehab.
Yes.
Final question about shambles, and it is an interesting word for people to choose. Let me float this to you as my final question, and that is, what on earth can Sir Keir Starmer do that he's not doing, or Ed Davey that he's not doing, or even Nicola Sturgeon? I hear them time and time again shout, we need a general election, we need a general election. Constitutionally, they can do nothing about that. Zero, zilch, squat, unless a significant number of Tory MPs back that call.
And I would be very surprised. I have no inside track to any of those individuals and what they're thinking, but I would be personally enormously surprised if any of them, having made those statements, had the slightest thought that they would be the most astonished people in the country if the Conservatives did what they were asking. Because actually, again, look at the figures. This is 97 plus, when the Conservative Party had the fewest number of MPs since 1832. At the moment, we're in that territory. Why would a Conservative Party willingly...
Turkeys and Christmas scream loudly. David Cowling, always a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed. The time is now 1 minute to 1. You're watching GB News. We've still more to come in the next couple of hours, hearing from former Northern Ireland First Minister Arlene Foster, former Conservative Minister, and a betting expert as well. That's not Arlene. Another guest is a betting expert to hear she may be, I don't know, I don't think who the money's on for the Tory leadership. But before that, we're going to take a quick break.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB Newsday and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back. Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 1. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Speculation is growing over whether Boris Johnson will make a comeback as Prime Minister. Business Secretary Jacob Rees-Mogg has become the first cabinet minister to back Boris. Candidates to succeed Liz Truss are yet to declare their intentions, but former Chancellor Rishi Sunak and the leader of the House, Penny Mordaunt, are widely expected to run. Those vying for the Tory party leadership will have to secure 100 nominations from the party's 357 MPs. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has ruled himself out of the race and has hinted at who he's backing.
At the moment, I would lean towards Boris Johnson. I think he will still have some questions to answer around, obviously, that investigation. But I know when I was Secretary of State for Defence, he invested in defence, he supported me, he supported the actions this country has taken to keep us safe. So that's at the moment, I'm leaning towards that. But I think, there are a few days to go and we'll see what's happened. There's some, other candidates who are just as excellent putting their name in the ring. But I think fundamentally we have to answer those first 2 points I said earlier.
Well, meanwhile, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer's warning against a revolving door of chaos under a Conservative government.
The risk is not a general election. The risk is continuing with this chaos. What you've seen in the last few weeks is real damage to our economy, real damage to our reputation as a country, and people are paying the price for that, whether it's in mortgages or other things. So the risk is not changing, and there's an alternative. You can either have more of this chaos under the Conservatives or stability under a Labour government.
Well, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey, told GB News there needs to be a general election.
I don't think any political party before has made such a mess, and the Conservative parties are totally to blame for this shambles. And I'm a patriot. I believe in my country. I want to serve my country to help people get out of this mess. And frankly, if the Conservatives were truly patriotic, they would vote for that general election so the British people could have their say.
Well, in Boris Johnson's constituency, there are mixed views on whether or not he should return to number 10.
I think he was good. He got us through quite a lot. And then they seemed to kick him out, and we thought it was terrible.
Yeah, I think he should bring back Boris because people stabbed him in the back.
Undecided at the moment because he made quite a mess of it the last time.
Well, I think we haven't got much of a choice. We haven't got a lot of people we can choose from.
No, definitely no Bojo. Rishi Sunak, that's our favourite choice.
MP Christian Matheson has resigned from the Labour Party following allegations of serious sexual misconduct. It's after the party suspended his whip and asked him to stand down. An independent parliamentary panel had recommended he be suspended from the Commons after the Commissioner for Standards upheld 2 allegations against him by a former member of staff. The pound is again sliding against the US dollar as government debt continues to climb. The Chancellor has promised to do whatever is necessary to fix finances after borrowing rose to £20 billion last month. Jeremy Hunt says he wants to ensure taxpayers' money is well spent following a spike in debt interest due to inflation. And high street stores are feeling the pinch with the latest figures showing yet another sales slump last month. Retail sales fell by 1.4%, which is much worse than analysts expected. The Office for National Statistics says food stores saw the biggest drop, with sales falling by 1.8%. The figures reflect ongoing concerns about the cost of living, as well as shop closures during the Queen's state funeral. Elsewhere, US intelligence suggests Iran has military experts training Russians in occupied Crimea. They're said to be there to teach them how to use Iranian-made drones. Both countries are denying the allegations. On Monday, the devices were used to launch an attack on the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. Ukraine claims they were deployed by Russia. And a sexual assault claim against actor Kevin Spacey has been dismissed by a New York court. The civil case was brought by Anthony Rapp, who accused the Oscar-winning actor of making an unwanted advance in 1986 when he was 14 years old. Spacey will face a criminal trial in London next year, where he faces 5 separate charges following alleged assaults between 2005 and 2013. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Alistair.
Rhiannon, thank you very much indeed. It is 7 minutes past 1. A very good afternoon to you. This is indeed GB Newsday, with me, Alistair Stewart, and a range of excellent friends and guests to try and find some semblance of logic or even possibly sanity about what's going on in this great country of ours, not least also within the Conservative Party. Pretty well the latest on that is that the Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, has ruled himself out of the running to be Britain's next Prime Minister. He's certainly a favourite amongst Tory grassroots members, was a name in the frame way back when Boris Johnson was ousted, but then said no, he had an important job to focus upon, not least, obviously, spearheading our support for the good people of Ukraine in their defence against the Russian incursion. But yet again, Ben Wallace says, no, not for me, thank you very much indeed. He will not be running, but he is moved to back Boris Johnson instead. He's tweeted, and I quote, "I'd like to put on the record that I'll not be letting my name go forward as a candidate. I'm privileged to be the UK Defence Secretary, and the current threat requires stability in that office." The prospects of the former Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, in the running to return to Downing Street has sharply divided MPs, however. Former Minister Jessie Norman said that Boris Johnson returning would be, and again I quote, absolutely catastrophic. Well, once again, Westminster is tying itself in all sorts of knots. There is undoubtedly a political crisis unfolding also in Northern Ireland, with the deadline rapidly running out for Sinn Féin and the DUP to agree to a power-sharing formula. Will the final days of the Truss premiership be focused enough to solve that issue? Well, I'm delighted to be joined now by fellow GB News presenter, and, of course, former First Minister of Northern Ireland, Arlene Foster. Great to see you. I'm going to broaden the question out because it's been something that has genuinely been playing on my mind throughout, and that is because of what's going on about the leadership of the Conservative Party. Pretty well nothing else is going on, whether you're worried about queues for hospitals at A&E, whether you're worried about, as you say, clearly Northern Ireland, the protocol, the elections and the rest of it, right across the spectrum. I mean, it is a shambles.
It's an omni-shambles.
Omni-shambles.
There's no doubt about that. And in Northern Ireland, we have been hurtling towards this deadline of 6 months. So the legislation says very clearly if there isn't government in place for 6 months, then the Secretary of State is under a legal duty to call another election. And there's been a lot of talk in Northern Ireland about that this week. There's been pressure put on from the Secretary of State and others on the DUP, as you would expect, because they're the ones saying we can't go into government because you haven't sorted out the Northern Ireland Protocol. That's actually causing a division within the United Kingdom, so we need to see that sorted out. Meanwhile, government is saying, look, the law is the law. If there isn't an executive in place by 1 minute past 12 on the 29th, which is next Friday morning, if there isn't a government in place, that he will have to call an election. And that election is going to cost a lot of money.
Yeah.
£6.5 million has been advised by the Electoral Office in Northern Ireland. And it'll come, suggestions, 15th of December. So right in the middle of the Christmas time, Northern Ireland may well be facing another election.
Yeah. And I'm not cynical about these matters at all, but I do look at the numbers, and maybe I should have asked David Cowling while he was in here before he slipped out as well. But in terms of the polling, absolutely no pressure whatsoever on Sinn Féin to be helpful, because all of the polls of late have been going in but one direction, and it's Sinn Féin's direction.
Well, Sinn Féin, as you know, became the largest party back in May. That's because the SDLP, which is the other nationalist Republican Party, they lost a number of seats, so Sinn Féin picked them up. I think if there's another election, it may well be the case that the SDLP will lose even more seats and Sinn Féin will pick them up. The question is what happens on the other side, on the Unionist side. Will the Democratic Unionist Party be able to pick up seats, perhaps that they didn't get the last time? As you will remember, Jim Allister, who is the traditional Unionist voice, got 60,000 votes, but he only got one seat. Because of the vagaries of PR. So it's interesting to see what will happen on the Unionist side and indeed on the National side. But I'll tell you this, Alistair, nobody wants an election in the month of Christmas.
Certainly not Christmas
time. I think that is very much the case. And what we're going to have, we may well not have a Prime Minister in place when this huge decision has to be made about calling an election, which is the legal duty, next week.
Yeah. I mean, you also have some experience, direct personal experience of a Tory party and a Tory government in a mess and a shambles and having to cut deals with people like your good selves and what have you. Take one step back, if you will, as a former First Minister, Member of Parliament and all the rest of it. Do you see a way that the Conservative Party can recover from this mess or not?
Well, of course they can recover from where they are, but they have to have a plan to recover from, because they are in the lowest, we're told, the lowest position they've ever been in, if you look at polls. So they'll have to try and build for the future. The question is, do they get that under Boris Johnson? Do they get it under Rishi Sunak? If they are the two people on the ticket going out to the membership, no matter who wins, there's going to be division, Alistair. And I think what you're looking at possibly is a realignment, because I think that if Rishi wins, there'll be people on the other side who will be very, very unhappy that he is the Prime Minister and leader, and vice versa for Boris as well. So we may well be seeing a realignment in terms of the Conservative Party.
Within the Conservative Party or with the emergence of another political force? I mean, our mutual friend Nigel Farage has been talking about that on air and off air for quite some time now. There are people like Reform Party out there already, Richard Tice and others. And I mentioned it in my big overall lead-in at the very beginning when we went on air shortly after midday. There's a world of difference between the Conservative Party suddenly deciding post-Ted Heath that it's Thatcherite and the British political landscape changing with the emergence of a new party like UKIP or whatever it might be. What's your instinct?
And of course, that's what happened in relation to Brexit. I mean, Nigel and others provided that outlet for people so that they could vote in the way that they felt necessary. And I mean, I think we do need to remember that there are a lot of people out there who were very upset that Boris was, in their words, forced out of prime ministerial position because they had voted for him to be the Prime Minister, and they felt that they hadn't voted for whoever was coming after him. If he comes back now, yes, they had voted for him, so perhaps those in the Conservative membership will be happier, but I don't think the MPs will be in that position, because we've seen that this morning with people saying it would be absolutely catastrophic if Boris Johnson come back. And then on the other hand, you have somebody of Ben Wallace's gravitas saying that he's leaning towards Boris Johnson at this point in time. So my goodness, we're in for a roller coaster couple of days, and then we will see who's on the ballot. And I think it'll be a tough time for the Conservative Party no matter what happens.
And you're on at 3.
And I'm on at 3.
Rock and roll. God knows what's going to happen.
I know. It's always quiet on a Friday. It's always quiet on a Friday, as you know.
Olivia Attlee is still here, GB News political reporter, I'll come to in a moment. But Benedict Spence as well, who I feel I owe one, because since we last spoke and you commented, you've not only had the former First Minister of Northern Ireland giving one of the most crisp and objective appraisals of the state of the Conservative Party right now, but you also heard Royston Smith, the Conservative Member of Parliament for Southampton Itchen, saying, do you know, actually a period in opposition might not be such a bad lot. Get rid of this bunch of absolute shenanigans who just want their seat round the cabinet and their pretty red box, as Charles Walker famously said. So first, quick thoughts on what Royston said?
Any Tory MP who thinks that a period in opposition would be a good thing needs, metaphorically, a slap, and if they still feel that way, should resign as an MP, because it's, I think, a very childish attitude to take. 5 years in opposition is not going to heal the divisions that have existed for decades in the Tory party. Let's be very clear about this. You know, the Brexit referendum hasn't solved them. Being in opposition is not going to solve it either, especially with the tumult of the economic crisis that is happening across the Western world at the moment. Actually, that is not going to happen. Let's be very clear about this. And I think it is coming from a very privileged and, frankly, quite infantile position for MPs to be throwing up their hands in the air and go, well, I don't want to do the job anymore. We might as well let the other... Well, in that case, get on with it. Resign.
And to be fair to Charles Walker, that was one of his other extraordinary phrases in that remarkable interview where he said there is nothing quite as an ex-MP.
Yes, absolutely. And I also think the other thing is, if we're talking about a split in the Conservative Party, let's say hypothetically that, you know, they hive off and form a new party, neither of those parties will ever win a majority. They will only ever be able to exist in coalition with each other. So then you're saying, what was the point of hiving off? Actually, you will just end up, you know, hurting each other when it comes general election time. What is required now is for, you know, maturity to take over, for them to grow up quickly, if they ever want to be a successfully electoral party, democratically elected party again. That is what is required now, not 5 years of going off and finding yourself, you know, the equivalent of a gap year or something like that. Actually, it is time to do it now. One person will win this contest, and you have to coalesce around that, and that person will have to decide to be a unity candidate and give some concessions to the other side, because otherwise, it's electoral oblivion.
Brilliant. OK, again, stay with you. I'm going to come back. You're the one who has to wait now and see what happens next. But as I said to you before, do nudge me and kick me if something does break on your laptops or on your cell phones. Arlene, great to talk to you. Be watching at 3. Benedict, thanks for your thoughts there. We're going to return to... it says here madness of Westminster. It's a calm, evolving situation, all perfectly sensible, with guests of mine... saying that maybe the Conservative Party needs a period in opposition, and then other guests saying that's a bit infantile, and any MP who wishes that upon themselves maybe should call it all a day. Well, joining me now is someone I have known and admired for a long time, and it really is a long time, because longest-standing political editor in what used to be called Fleet Street, and I don't know what it's called nowadays, but anyway, Nigel Nelson is the political editor of the Sunday Mirror and the Sunday People, and there he is in his wolf's lair. I'm going to cut straight to the chase on that point that Benedict was nodding towards and that I put to Royston Smith, and that is that maybe, you know, the Tories could do with a period in opposition to sort themselves out. And Benedict said it's crazy, you never come back. If you don't know what it's like being in opposition, it really hurts. Your friends in the Labour Party know all too well what it's like to be in opposition and to have been in opposition for over a decade. But what's your view?
Well, I mean, I think Benedict's absolutely right, that the Conservative Party is facing an existential crisis at the moment, but splitting and forming two parties wouldn't be the answer to that for them. The problem at the moment that they're facing is that for the last week they've been talking about how to get a unity candidate in place. Ben Wallace's name was mentioned, so was Jeremy Hunt's. Both have ruled themselves out of the leadership. And at the moment, it does rather look like that the leadership will come down to Boris Johnson, if he can get the 100 names, and Rishi Sunak. If that's the case, Boris Johnson will most likely win amongst the membership. Now, Boris Johnson is not a unity candidate. I find it astonishing that people are actually talking now about him making a comeback. But I don't think the Tory party would split as a result of that. What you might see, of course, is that there's a race to become the shorter-serving Prime Minister ever, and Boris Johnson might win that because, of course, we've got Privileges Committee next month.
Absolutely, the case still standing there. Just for folk listening to our conversation on radio rather than television, Nigel, I explained that Boris Johnson is at the famous little podium there outside Number 10 when he called it a day. And immediately before that, interestingly, we saw him retaking his oath of allegiance to the new king, which all MPs have been invited to. Not all of them have taken that up, but Johnson did it, so clearly he intends to carry on representing the good people of Uxbridge, at least for a little while longer, and in so doing with total loyalty to His Majesty the King. On the point of intellectual realignment, I hear what you say there, but you began talking about Ben Wallace, who has come out in support of Boris Johnson. And I heard very clearly what you said about Boris not being a unity candidate. All of my other guests have said that as well. But if Wallace is saying, look, he's the way forward, Wallace is reading the political riot act to members of his party, is he not?
Oh yes, I think that's probably true, and it's up to Ben Wallace to decide. I mean, I find that the endorsement a bit sort of lukewarm. To say you're leaning towards somebody is not exactly saying that I support them 100%. And I think, in a sense, that what Ben Wallace is talking about is the great dilemma that the Conservative MPs face at the moment. They know there is no best option, and what they're trying to work out is what the least worst option might be. So they're not really keen on any of this, but the argument goes that Boris Johnson, as you said on your programme, Boris Johnson was the one candidate who had an electoral mandate back in 2019. They like the idea of him going out campaigning again. It's the one thing he's good at. He's less good at being a prime minister, but he certainly can go out campaigning. And when it comes to their seats, of which sort of 200 odd are about to lose if there was a general election, they can see that Boris Johnson might be their best bet. But as I say, it is the least worst option rather than a good option.
A quick one, Nigel, because your ear is very close to the ground on these matters. I also asserted right at the beginning of this programme that the only way in which Sir Keir Starmer, Ed Davey and Nicola Sturgeon and the rest of them in opposition can get a general election is that if a significant number of Tory MPs defect. I don't mean join Labour, but are prepared to vote with them in a vote of no confidence. Otherwise, there will not be a general election before the late autumn or early spring of next year. Are you hearing any buzz that Labour is making any headway in tickling Tories?
Well, I can tell you that I'm in the House of Commons at the moment, and it's strangely and eerily quiet, actually, here today. The Labour Party's view is obviously they've got to call for a general election. They don't really hope that they will get one. And quite clearly that Tory MPs won't do that. Now, there are two ways we can get an election. As you said, there has to be a vote of no confidence in the government. The government has a big majority. Tories won't be turkeys voting for Christmas. So it's unlikely to go that route. The only other way I can see is if public pressure builds up so much that, in fact, it can't be avoided. And the key date to look out for is October the 31st, when Jeremy Hunt delivers his next financial statement. Now, if the markets react badly to that, if it really looks like that even he can't save the economy, there's going to be huge pressure from businesses, from the voters, from other parties that really there is no alternative but to go to the polls. I think that is a slim chance, but it is one possibility.
Fascinating. For all of that, Nigel, thank you so much. Always a pleasure to talk to you. And if I don't talk to you over the weekend, which I may well do, you have a great weekend and keep in touch with us. Thank you very much indeed. Nigel Nelson, political editor of the Sunday Mirror and the Sunday People. As it happens, the timing could not be better, given Nigel Nelson's last answer there, because just coming into the studio now and sitting next to me, I'm delighted to say, is my other very good friend, and that's Liam Halligan, our business and economic correspondent, because amongst all of the political convolutions and rows and the rest of it raging around the merits or otherwise of Trussonomics, there is the market still out there. Things are happening. I kind of went to bed with a bit of quite good news about the pound recovering. I woke up this morning to gather that it's now all gone Johnny Rotten.
Yeah, it's come off a little bit, and government borrowing costs are spiking up. That's mainly because of some new figures out from the Office for National Statistics. And I've drawn you a little picture, Alistair, which we can have a look at, some graphics, and I'll talk through it, not least for people who are listening on GB News Radio. If we can see that graphic, we see that in September 2021, the public sector borrowing, the amount of money that the government borrowed in September 2021 was £17.8 billion. That shot up this September to £20 billion. That's a big increase, and it's way above the OBR forecast for borrowing in September of £14.8 billion. So mixed into this heady brew of febrile financial markets and political convulsions is the reality, Alistair, that we've borrowed a lot more in the last month, and that was before the mini-budget measures kicked in, of course, to the extent that they will kick in, particularly.
And before much serious money is headed in our direction to help with our energy bills.
That's right, that's right. So it's in October that the energy support package begins. That's when the government starts paying big money to deliver that guaranteed unit cost of electricity. And I've always maintained, from sitting in that chair when the mini-budget was happening, the markets are not particularly bothered about the top rate of tax move, which obviously Westminster has alighted on and the political class has gone completely nuts about, because it allows people to say the Tories are selfish. And that tax move was ill-judged, it was ill-timed, it was politically tin-eared. What the markets are worried about, and they're still worried about, is the open-ended commitment that the government has to deliver energy at a certain price to households and firms, only for 6 months now, but 6 months is still a long time. You can go bust in 6 months easily.
Sure, absolutely.
Whatever happens on wholesale energy markets, that is what is worrying financial markets.
All right, then let me bring you straight then to the brilliant point that Nigel Nelson raised just before you started speaking, and that is you can't have a general election unless lots of Tory MPs side with Labour in a vote of no confidence, unless, says Nigel Nelson, one of the most experienced voices in the world of political journalism, on the 31st of October, Jeremy Hunt, or whoever is then Chancellor of the Exchequer, unless they persuade the city that that OBR report is genuine and it's for real and that this budget going forward can work. If they don't like it and the pound tanks and the interest rates go Johnny Rotten again, then there could be a general election.
Well, then Conservative MPs, many would feel morally compelled to spark some kind of general election. Not that a general election is necessarily going to help us deal with what is the big picture here. And the big picture here is a long-term unwinding of ultra-low interest rates that have been far too low for far too long, a long-term retrenching after years and years of ridiculously cheap money, the so-called quantitative easing. No politician, however well-polished, however well-prepared, no central banker can stop that springing back of those economic forces being artificially constrained for so long. And the tragedy is, and it is a tragedy, and some of us have been warning about this for a very long time, it brings me no pleasure to say, the tragedy is that a lot of companies, a lot of young people have levered themselves up, as we say. They've taken on lots of debt to build their business or to buy their dream family home at very, very low interest rates. And as they have to refinance at much higher interest rates, it will be very, very difficult for them to hang on to those assets. That is why there will be so much concern among voters about how, frankly, the political and media class have handled economic policy making over the last 10 years.
All right, Liam, great to talk to you as always. I think we talk again once more before 3 o'clock.
I hope so.
My fingers are crossed on that. Thank you very much indeed, Liam Halligan there on the money for GB News, our business and economics editor. Now, as we were talking a little earlier in the programme, if you missed it, let me remind you, I think in some respects it is the big political development in the last couple of hours, and that is the Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, ruling himself out of the leadership race to replace Liz Truss as the latest leader of the Conservative Party and therefore, by definition, the latest Prime Minister of this great country of ours. Mr Wallace said that currently his top pick would be Boris Johnson. He didn't, interestingly, say, I back Boris, Boris is the man to take us forward, but he was leaning towards that direction. His top pick would currently be Boris Johnson, and Mr Wallace went on to explain that that was because of Boris Johnson's proven record of protecting defence spending and keeping the country safe, and spending a good deal of your money on helping try and keep Ukraine safe as well. Let's have a listen to the man in his own words, Secretary of State for Defence, Ben Wallace.
The Tory party has to settle down and get on with delivering its mandate that it was elected on in 2019 with a massive majority, which is to govern on behalf of the citizens of this country. And I think that means tackling the economic challenges we face, tackling the threats globally that we face, and I make sure that's the real number one priority for us all.
Can you say whether you would be standing in this leadership race?
Look, last time I said I wouldn't stand, it was not something that I was prepared to do. I think you really have to want it as a Prime Minister to do that job. You have to really, really think it's the job for you. For me, I feel that I can add the best value in keeping people safe at Defence by being the Defence Secretary. It's the job that I have been doing, and it's the job I intend to stay doing. So I am not going to be standing for Prime Minister this time, and the same reasons really apply as last time.
Can you tell us who you would be putting your weight behind?
Well, I think it's really important to consider for me which candidate will recognise the very pressing security concerns that face this country at the time, that will take decisions to invest in defence and security. It's really important. Without national security, there is no economic security, and I think that is important that whoever are the candidates putting their names forward, they indicate that. But also at the same time, I have to recognise the issue of the mandate. This will be potentially our third Prime Minister since the general election of 2019. That means we have to think about that legitimacy question that the public will be asking themselves, and also about who could win the next election. That's obviously important for any political party at the time. So, at the moment, I would lean towards Boris Johnson. I think he will still have some questions to answer around, obviously, that investigation. But I know when I was Secretary of State for Defence, he invested in defence, he supported me, he supported the actions this country has taken to keep us safe. So that's at the moment, I'm leaning towards that. But I think, there are a few days to go, and we'll see what's happened. There's some other candidates who are just as excellent putting their name in the ring, but I think fundamentally we have to answer those first 2 points I said earlier.
So you would not be supporting then the candidacy of Rishi Sunak?
Well, I think what I've said is at the moment I'm leaning towards Boris Johnson. I'll be keen to see what Rishi Sunak also says on defence and security and investment. And I think it's just important to reiterate to your viewers there can't be economic security without national security. And therefore, those candidates need to answer that question as much as what they're going to do in the here and now about the economy.
Do you know whether Mr Johnson would be in favour of keeping the commitment to keeping defence spending at 3% of GDP in the next decade?
Well, his track record is definitely of investing in defence. He gave me an extra £24 billion into defence when other departments weren't getting a multi-year settlement at the time, and I think that shows his actions were obviously his true colours on that. And I think we just have to continue looking at the impacts of the economic situation. But the direction of travel has to be an increased investment in defence, and certainly recognising that there are real threats to this country, and there's not a day that goes by without me working on that. And I am in a position where I see those threats. Often the public can't see them, I'm afraid, because of intelligence, but nonetheless they are real, and I'll look for a candidate and a leader that can do that. Boris Johnson has to date always had that track record, and that's why I'll be leaning towards him at the moment.
Do you not think that Mr Johnson, though, is tainted by previous scandals and that the electorate really wouldn't go for that?
Well, let's see. In 2019, he won a general election with a huge majority. He was legitimately sent into Parliament as the Prime Minister based on the vote of the whole electorate, not just on Tory members, not just on members of Parliament. That he got a mandate, and I think that's an important thing for all of us to bear in mind. We'll see what happens. Of course, unity is also important. I'll be looking for how the candidates are prepared to bring the party together, because without unity, we can't govern either.
But some would say that Mr Johnson would be even more divisive, because it seems that a number of MPs have said that they will resign the whip if he becomes the candidate.
Look, we've seen, sadly, from the last leadership election, the party had lots of finalists. There wasn't a clear winner head and shoulders above the other. That, of course, is cause for concern. And here we are back again, I'm afraid. And last time they didn't choose, Rishi Sunak, they didn't choose others, they chose Liz Truss. I would have hoped that we'd all settled down, given people some space, delivered a new budget. That hasn't happened. So therefore, we have to recognise we have to focus on unity. We have to focus on who's best placed to win the next election as well.
Do you think it's realistic for there to be a Halloween budget, given that the new leader will only be in place 2 days before this budget takes place?
Well, look, I think the timing of the budget is incredibly important when it comes to the advice you get from the Treasury. The Treasury has to make sure that it keeps confidence in the international markets, and if that deems a budget on the 31st October, then that is what potentially has to happen. But I'll leave that decision to the Chancellor, who has the best interests of the economy at his heart.
Do you think any potential leader is going to have to really work hard with Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor? Is it really Jeremy Hunt who's still going to be in charge?
Well, I hope Jeremy stays as Chancellor. I had a meeting with him yesterday. Jeremy is, like me, a very experienced member of the government. He joined with me in 2005. He is calm, he is experienced, he's knowledgeable about all that needs to be done. And I have a lot of faith in him being our Chancellor.
And how realistic is it, do you think, of any of these candidates to get 100 votes? How many candidates do you think will be able to achieve that?
Well, we've got over 350 MPs. I think that is possible. We've got between now and Monday, and I think we'll get on with it.
Fascinating interview. We were all hanging on that. We hadn't heard the full one before, and we're watching and listening to it with you, which is always a good way to do it. Olivia Utley, I say we, Olivia Utley, our GB News political correspondent, and also my very good friend, political commentator Benedict Spence here in the studio as well. Firstly, just quick reaction to that. What he didn't say was that as Defence Secretary, he's actually got a bit of form with Rishi Sunak on defence spending. When Rishi was Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi was not as overwhelmingly enthusiastic on jacking up defence spending as Ben was or as Boris was.
No, and I think that's very interesting. I think what Ben Wallace has done there, and I think it's important to reiterate just what an electoral force Ben Wallace is. He's incredibly popular with both Conservative Party members and with the general public. So he really is a heavyweight in the Conservative Party. And what he's done with that intervention there is he is going to make all of the other candidates in the race, all the candidates in the race, fall over each other to try and promise more for defence, because Ben Wallace is basically saying he's leaning towards Boris Johnson, but he's going to keep his powder dry while he waits to see who can promise the most.
More caveats than you can shake a dictionary at.
Exactly.
Which takes me to you, Ben, because the other thing that I thought was intriguing and I asked the controller to tell me who the interviewer was, because I thought she did a really, really strong job. When she put to Ben Wallace, but Boris Johnson got scandals coming out of his ears, and it was you mentioned earlier on in the conversations about even parliamentary investigations that he could face. Ben said, well, scandals, we'll see.
Yes.
Doesn't sweep them away, doesn't say, oh, that's not a problem at all. We'll see.
Yes, it's priced in with Boris Johnson is the thing, ultimately. And I mean, he's lost a lot of support, obviously, because of the way that he conducted himself in office. I think it's a bit of a gamble, ultimately, to say that because Liz Truss, her ratings have dragged them so far down that there will be a sort of a boomerang effect and that all will be forgotten with Boris Johnson. But perhaps that's the gamble that you're taking. Given that he has been able to come through so much in the past, it wouldn't necessarily surprise you if that happened again. But, of course, the whole thing with the Parliamentary Standards Committee yet to be seen, so that, potentially could throw another spanner in the works. But that has always been the attitude with Boris Johnson. These things, he attracts scandal, he attracts drama. You take that with the package. That's ultimately what he is.
And final quick one for you, if I may. I always like reminding folk, if they don't know, that Ben is one of those members of Parliament who genuinely served in uniform, was an officer in the Scots Guards and has seen action, knows what that really does mean. The standout word for me in that entire interview was winner. When pressed on why he was leaning towards Boris Johnson, because he's a winner. They know that their seats are up for grab, that they could face an election, whether it's because of the OBR report or the economy going, what's it? They need to be led by somebody who can get out there across the country and get enough votes to hang on in there. And Ben sees Boris as the man.
Absolutely, and I think there'll be plenty of other MPs who don't particularly like Boris Johnson, don't particularly like what he stands for, but who see him as a winner and are now in survival instinct mode and could vote for him on that basis.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. Olivia, thank you very much indeed, and Benedict. Stay where you are. You are bolted to the ground for another hour or so, at least half an hour, I hope, but I hope you can manage to do that. Great insights, and thank you so much. The man we've been talking about for the last 20 minutes via that brilliant interview with Ben Wallace, Boris Johnson, of course, is reportedly travelling back from his holiday in the Bahamas to launch his leadership bid following Liz Truss's resignation. Jacob Rees-Mogg has tweeted the slogan, "Boris or bust." One potential fly in the ointment, however, is Boris Johnson's own seat. It's a marginal that he won by, it says here, 7,000 votes. I think it may have been slightly fewer than that. But the person who definitely knows, because she is an absolute expert on Uxbridge, is our London reporter, Alice Porter. Now, you've done the number. Is it a 7,000 majority or 5,000?
It was just over 7,000 in the last election, and then in 2017 it was just over 5,000. So not a particularly large majority, and then it will be fascinating to see what will happen here in the next election. But in terms of how people are feeling on the street, I think perhaps the expression "absence makes the heart grow fonder" is something that's come to mind, because I've been here so many times over the last few months getting people's reaction to Partygate and various shenanigans going on at Westminster that Boris Johnson was involved in. And a lot of people at the time were very, very frustrated with him. But now I feel like the tide has very much turned and people are very, very positive about him. I've had lots and lots of people coming up to me and saying, we've got to get Boris back. And maybe the last 6 weeks or so that we've had with a different Prime Minister, maybe that's been enough to make people perhaps garner support, I guess, for the old Prime Minister from people in his constituency, because he does have a mandate, and that's going to be really, I think, crucial in this next week ahead. And we've now, since we last spoke, we've now got 30 MPs that are backing him. We've had Ben Wallace saying he's leaning towards Boris Johnson, but perhaps not the most ringing endorsement, but still an endorsement nonetheless. So you've got a lot of support behind him from people, partly because he will be the only person who has been voted on by the public. And that's what a lot of people who've been coming up to me, they're saying, we voted for him and felt that he was very much stabbed in the back this summer. And that was something that many people said to me when I was out and about this morning speaking to people about whether they think Boris Johnson should make a comeback.
He was quite strong. He was good. I think he was good. He got us through quite a lot. And then they seemed to kick him out, and we thought it was terrible.
Yeah, I think he should bring back Boris, because people stabbed him in the back, and you can't trust Rigi to be the Prime Minister.
Undecided at the moment, because he made quite a mess of it the last time, and that was the reason he went, obviously.
Well, I think we haven't got much of a choice. We haven't got a lot of people we can choose from, and at least he did try and aim for the common people. And at the moment, I think the working class common people need somebody that's going to be trying to do something for them. And although people had a go at him for other things, I think he did try his best in the circumstances that we had.
No, definitely no Bojo. Rishi Sunak, that's our favourite choice. Let's see. He will make it as a new PM. Let's see.
And why Rishi over Boris?
Well, obviously we have seen the Bojo's this for a few years. Obviously, he hasn't done a great job. Now the Rishi Sunak is upcoming one. He has worked as a chancellor and he has done a great job. So hopefully, he will make it as a new PM.
some people in Uxbridge speaking to me earlier. So, as I was saying, Boris Johnson will be the only person who has a mandate. But on the other hand, he's also been investigated about whether he misled Parliament. And that's really going to come to the forefront next month, when the Privileges Committee will be looking more closely about whether he misled Parliament. Now, that could result in him being suspended, and there could be a by-election in this very seat. So he's not necessarily the safest choice for a lot of people, but he certainly is a popular one with many people in his constituency.
Really brilliant. I don't normally like vox pops very much, but those were intriguing, particularly the woman talking about the need to engage with working class people, common people, as she put it, because that is certainly something that Boris Johnson historically has been very good at and will matter crucially in any election, in any constituency. Alice Porter there, live for us and working earlier this morning in Uxbridge, picking up those opinions on camera from the folk who the Prime Minister, the former Prime Minister's fate locally at least rests in, because he certainly can't run again for leadership if he hasn't got the support of his local people. We'll keep in touch with Alice as the day unfolds. So that's Uxbridge, which is the Boris Johnson seat. But where do the Conservative Party need also to go? There is an election in 2 years, a general election maximum. If not, it could be sooner if MPs can sort themselves out within the opposition parties to do it. Then literally everything will be up for grabs. And our West Midlands reporter, Jack Carson, has chosen Stoke-on-Trent Central constituency to test the waters. The reason for that is that that's where the Conservatives only have a majority of 670. Forget the luxuries of 5,000s and 7,000s down in Uxbridge. Jack, what's the feeling in Stoke?
Well, like you said, Alistair, this is the minority of minority seats for the Conservative Party. It was that 2019 general election, that manifesto from Boris Johnson to get Brexit done, which turned this traditionally red and Labour seat blue. But the feeling on the ground here is mixed today, and I've been getting reaction from voters about Liz Truss's resignation, also who they think should be the next person in number 10.
I think it was inevitable. I'm glad she's gone. What sort of mess we're going to be in, I don't know, because I can't see any... I don't vote for Conservative anyway, but I can't see of any of the other candidates coming through and being strong enough.
What do you make about a possible return of Boris Johnson?
My daughter would welcome that. I don't. I think he's run his course. I don't think he should be trying to come back and flog a dead horse.
What about the likes of Rishi Sunak, Penny Mordaunt are also up?
I don't think Rishi Sunak should get it, because I don't think he'll do that good a job. You know, Liz Truss, all right, she's fair enough, but Rishi Sunak, I don't trust him. Boris, I trust him because he's done a good job.
So there you go. That's the view of a few voters here in Stoke-on-Trent Central. This is one of those seats that the Conservatives need to get those Conservative voters out voting again, because it's not necessarily the case that voters here might switch party. It's the fact that they need to feel invigorated to come out and vote for the Conservative Party again. One voter I spoke to who agreed that they were a traditional Conservative voter, were a Conservative member in the past, just didn't feel any of the candidates, Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak or Penny Mordaunt, those three front runners already, invigorated them enough to come back and vote for a party which he just didn't feel was united, and that's the feeling here on the ground in Stoke.
Jack, thanks for capturing it so succinctly and lucidly. Thank you very much indeed. Jack Charlson there, our reporter in Stoke. So, as he was just making crystal clear, and indeed as Alice was making crystal clear in Uxbridge, it's ordinary people right across the spectrum who will be crucial in any election. But the ones that Boris Johnson did particularly well with, and therefore they will matter, are behind the so-called red wall. Those seats who were Labour forever and a day, that suddenly, lo and behold, along came Boris Johnson with a promise of all sorts of stuff that he was able to persuade to come across and build up that extraordinary majority of 80 seats. Now, as it happens, My dear friend and fellow GB News presenter, Gloria De Piero, is a former Labour MP in just one such seat, and she indeed has been back to it, her former constituency of Ashfield in the East Midlands, to meet some of the locals that she spoke to in May this year. Here's what she found out this time.
So we're back in the Ashfield constituency. The last time we all spoke, Boris Johnson was Prime Minister. A lot has happened since then.
Just a bit.
Nikki, you are normally a Labour voter. You've always voted Labour. I want you to have a think about if there was a general election tomorrow, you're going to the polling station, who are you going to vote for?
To be bluntly honest, at the moment, none of them. Even though previously when we've spoke, you asked us a question about Keir Starmer, about what we knew about him. We didn't know anything, to be bluntly honest. I have watched quite a lot more about when Keir Starmer's been speaking and things like that. But even now, even though he seems to be getting a bit more braver about confrontation, a bit more argumentative to it and everything else, he still hasn't, for me, pushed himself right to that top where he sticks out as a real leader.
Patty, you're fascinating because you voted Labour all your life, but last time you voted Conservative.
Yep.
I want you to imagine tomorrow there's a general election. Who out of this gang, we don't know who will be the Conservative candidate yet, so we've given you good selection. Obviously, we assume Keir Starmer will be the Labour candidate. Who are you going to vote for?
Right. There's a few on the table I don't really recognise, being honest. Like I say, I'm not up on politics 100%. I don't know why they want to bring Boris back. Penny, she came across good when it was Queen's funeral. Sula, bless her, she left yesterday, so she held her own. Keir Starmer, I think he's just wanting just to get in there. Basically, it don't matter what he says, he'll say whatever he wants just to get there. This gentleman here, Ben Willis, he fascinates me. Do you know why? Because he's the Defence Secretary. He's to do with all the veterans and one thing and another. And it's about time this country recognised the veterans. They shouldn't be on the street. Why are they on the street? Personally, why have not? No, they have not. They've got health problems and what have you, and they fought for our country. So personally, this gentleman here, Ben Wallace,
Catherine, you are a floating voter. You've voted Labour before, you've voted Conservative last time.
And Liberal Democrats.
And Liberal Democrats, so you're a genuine floating voter. You own this pub too. Thank you for having us.
That's all right.
Right, tomorrow, so last time you voted Conservative at the general election, tomorrow, imagine, we don't know who the Conservative candidate is. We assume he will be the Labour candidate. What are you going to do tomorrow in a general election? Who would you like to vote for as Prime Minister?
I'd struggle, to tell you the truth, because I don't know whether anybody, whoever goes in, has got a massive task on their hands, no matter what, whether it's Labour, whether it's Conservative, whether it's Lib Dem, or even if it could end up a coalition again. Because there's nobody out there that's standing out. I think for the country, there isn't anybody out there that I would feel confident doing by one party. I think a coalition would work better, personally. And I think the best one to run the Conservative is either Penny or Ben Wallace, because he's used to working with troops, he's used to working as a group.
High pressure.
And pressurised. And I think out of all of them, it's either Penny or Ben Wallace for the Conservatives. Keir Starmer, not sure. He seems to have come out his shell a little bit, which I totally agree with Nikki. But I don't know whether Labour's strong enough either. I think it should be an all-party coalition. Liberal Dems, Conservative and Labour. They've got to get this country back on track. And the only way is all of them singing off the same hymn sheet for us. They've got to work for us at the end of the day.
So, Catherine, you're not sure which party you're going to vote for. If it was tomorrow, you're just not sure.
Still don't know.
Right.
I wouldn't.
Okay.
I would say I wouldn't know who to vote for.
No,
in the sense of whether I would vote for Keir Starmer. I mean, the issue I've got at the moment is there's just so much infighting in Parliament at the moment. if it's not between parties, it's between members of the same party.
Yeah.
I mean, last night was a disgrace, completely.
So this will be going out on Friday. You're talking about the fracking vote when there was chaotic scenes in Parliament. We're recording on Thursday.
That just struck me as a government that is completely out of control. Completely not. No, there isn't. They're just too busy arguing inside
themselves.
Yeah,
they are.
John, you are a floating voter. You voted Labour in the past. That last general election, you voted Conservative.
Yeah.
We don't know who the Conservative candidate will be. Here's some runners and riders.
Yeah.
We assume Keir Starmer will be the Labour candidate. You go into the polling station tomorrow. Who would you like to vote for as Prime Minister?
None of them. As they are. I agree with what Catherine said. I think a coalition would be the ideal solution for the country. But again, what Catherine said, they all need to be singing off the same hymn sheet for the people, not for themselves, arguing in and out between you did this, you did that. It needs to be one. But obviously, that probably won't happen. So it's only one.
Yeah.
It's a tough one. Ben would be fantastic, but at the same time, we can't lose him running the defence.
Yeah, exactly.
If he went, who would replace him?
Exactly.
And that would be such a massive hit for our defence, especially with what's going on in the world at the minute.
Yeah.
He would be ideal. And if he ran, I probably would vote for him.
Right.
But it would be a very tough choice because we need him.
Graham, you always vote Labour.
Yeah, I have done for a lot of years.
How do you think your fella's doing, Keir Starmer?
To be honest, I can't really gel with him at all. I don't get him. I don't get where he's coming from, where he's going to. It seems like a facsimile of something else that he's trying to copy. I don't know if that makes any sense. But I just can't sort of get to grips. So, again, I don't know particularly who I'd vote for. The coalition thing sounds absolutely amazing.
It ain't going to happen.
But it's not going to happen, is it? You can imagine, can't you?
Which is why I'm now going to force all of your hands.
Really?
Yeah.
Ow.
You're going to the polling station.
OK.
Who are you voting for? You're voting for Ben Wallace. You're not going back to Labour, Pat. You voted Labour all your life. You voted Conservative last time.
I don't think it's fair that people have fought for this country. They come back, they've lost loved ones out there, and one thing or another they fought against. They're on the street. Why are they on the street?
And because of his record defending our troops and our forces, you want him to be Prime Minister?
I love it.
And with a heavy heart, I would probably do the same.
Yeah.
With a heavy heart for the
Heavy
defence.
heart, I do. Honestly, because I think he is going to be the one. Honestly, I think he'll be the one that does.
There's nothing better than a sergeant major shouting at you, and you all pull your socks up.
He needs to rein his troops in, and the only way of doing that is getting somebody that's used to it.
Nobody's mentioned Rishi Sunak.
No.
It's just if we've got Ben Wallace, right, how is that going to stack up with the rest of the party? Are we going to end up in the same situation we're in now, where Liz Truss has resigned? We're still back into the situation where we're trying to they're trying to decide a new Prime Minister, and we're going to end. Are we going to go round that revolving door situation again, where all of a sudden we've gone from a party where we've got Boris Johnson, then Liz Truss, then a new Prime Minister, say for example Ben Wallace? Is it going to go back to the infighting again? Is it going back to the actual situation where they're not actually controlling the budgets or anything else?
He'll be reining them in.
Yeah.
He will.
He'll rein them in.
He will.
I'm going to mix it up a bit. Let's just say Boris Johnson is a Conservative leader. And Boris Johnson versus Keir Starmer. What are you doing, Pat?
Neither of them.
Catherine?
I would struggle. I would struggle.
Rishi Sunak versus Keir Starmer. Any of you?
No, Ben Wallace, Keir Starmer, it'd be Ben Wallace.
Ben Wallace.
Keeps the will.
He says he's on your side. He says he represents the workers, Keir Starmer.
Does he? He's all for what he wants. And that is what some...
It's not strong.
No. We need somebody that's strong, like this man, who will fight for the right of making Great Britain great again.
OK, I'm going to force you. You're not going to vote for... Is anyone going to vote for this? You're going to vote for this man?
Well, I'm really not sure. No,
You've
I'm
done
really
what
split. Yes, I know.
You're not
I know. I'm not sure. I really
you're
don't
like
know.
me. I
exactly
sit
the
and
same.
look at him and I think, yeah,
There's some
you're
sort
better
of...
than you were in the sense of when we last spoke, but you're, to me, he still hasn't got that edge.
No.
OK.
You need somebody really,
You need
really
somebody
strong,
who's
especially
a lot
now.
stronger.
What's been happening in the world at the moment, you need somebody with an iron
I'm going to be
will.
honest, I don't
No.
see that.
Final question. Does anybody think it's a good idea for Boris Johnson to come back?
No.
He will be a bridge.
He's burnt his bridges. Why should he be able to come back? It's like sacking somebody and saying, "No, here you go, you're leader again. You can carry on."
It's not just that.
It's
This
not.
country at this precise moment is being looked upon by every other country in the world, and we are a laughing stock.
We have been, haven't we?
If we brought Boris back after what happened and after what's gone on recently, we'd be an even bigger laughing stock. How would that affect us in the economy, for starters, trade and everything else like that, when we've got somebody like that back in charge?
Every time I come here, I find the comments and the observations and your opinions absolutely fascinating. And if it's all right with you, I'm going to track you right up until that next general election. As one of these and this man fight for your votes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Absolutely brilliant journalism from Gloria De Piero and brilliant political analysis from those lovely men and women that she gathered around her again for another take. We sat here in the studio listening to it, utterly riveted. I hope you did as well. Ben Wallace should have gone to Ashfield, shouldn't he?
Ben Wallace, wow. I mean, unbelievably popular. They all love him. We've seen other focus groups across the country love him as well. The lady who mentioned a man in uniform. I think that's what appeals. We live in sort of troubled times, and somebody who has actually served and feels like a sort of steady hand on the tiller. The way he's behaved throughout the Ukraine crisis is obviously very popular, marks him out as a statesman, but he's not standing.
No.
But it just shows again just how much whoever he decides to plump with in the end, and as we've discussed, lots of caveats behind his support for Boris Johnson, will be very important.
Not great news for Boris, but the person for whom those interviews was absolutely catastrophic was undoubtedly Keir Starmer. I just can't gel with him. I don't get what he's about. I don't like him, and I wouldn't vote for him. And those are voters that Labour and Sir Keir desperately need to win back.
Well, that's the thing, actually, throughout this. It's never really been about Keir Starmer grabbing the attention. It's just been waiting for the ball to come out to the back of the scrum, as Boris Johnson once put it.
Yeah.
You know, when you hear that sort of thing, you think it's entirely possible that he could fumble it, were it not for the fact that the current Prime Minister, about to be replaced, obviously, were quite so bad. I did think it was very interesting that, Boris did not poll particularly well, but of course, Ben Wallace, who is, at the moment, leaning towards carries a lot of gravitas. Now, incidentally, there hasn't been a Defence Secretary who went on to be Prime Minister since Harold Macmillan in the 50s. I think that sort of shows you, actually, that he doesn't actually have the pedigree of leading into that role.
As is attributed to the man himself, although I don't think he actually ever did say it. Events did, boy, can change. We shall see. Benedict and Olivia, thank you both very much indeed. It's just 1:01, so I'm being hotly told off in my ear for having drifted on for too long. My fault, not theirs. We've lots more to come in our final hour on our top story, and it is the second race to number 10 beginning. Who is going to win it and become our next Prime Minister? But before that, other things are happening across the world and in this great country of ours. So let's bring you right up to date with all of the very latest news. Here again, Rhiannon.
Good afternoon, it's 2:02, your top stories from the GB newsroom. Speculation continues to grow over whether Boris Johnson will make a comeback as Prime Minister. Business Secretary Jacob Rees-Mogg has become the first Cabinet Minister to back Boris. Candidates to succeed Liz Truss are yet to declare their intentions, but former Chancellor Rishi Sunak and the leader of the House, Penny Mordaunt, are widely expected to run. Those vying for the Tory party leadership will have to secure 100 nominations from the party's 357 MPs. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has ruled himself out of the race and hinted at who he's backing.
the moment, I would lean towards Boris Johnson. I think he will still have some questions to answer around, obviously, that investigation. But I know when I was Secretary of State for Defence, he invested in defence, he supported me, he supported the actions this country has taken to keep us safe. So that's at the moment, I'm leaning towards that. But I think, there are a few days to go and we'll see what's happened. There's some, other candidates who are just as excellent putting their name in the ring. But I think fundamentally we have to answer those first 2 points I said earlier.
Well, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer is warning against a revolving door of chaos under a Conservative government.
The risk is not a general election. The risk is continuing with this chaos. What you've seen in the last few weeks is real damage to our economy, real damage to our reputation as a country, and people are paying the price for that, whether it's in mortgages or other things. So the risk is not changing, and there's an alternative. You can either have more of this chaos under the Conservatives or stability under a Labour government.
Meanwhile, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Ed Davey, told GB News there needs to be a general election.
I don't think any political party before has made such a mess, and the Conservative parties are totally to blame for this shambles. And I'm a patriot. I believe in my country. I want to serve my country to help people get out of this mess. And frankly, if the Conservatives were truly patriotic, they would vote for that general election so the British people could have their say.
And in Boris Johnson's constituency, there are mixed views on whether or not he should return to number 10.
I think he was good. He got us through quite a lot. And then they seemed to kick him out, and we thought it was terrible.
Yeah, I think he should bring back Boris because people stabbed him in the back.
Undecided at the moment because he made quite a mess of it the last time.
Well, I think we haven't got much of a choice. We haven't got a lot of people we can choose from.
No, definitely no Bojo. Rishi Sunak, that's our favourite choice.
In other news, human remains found in a loft at a property in Milton Keynes have been confirmed as Leah Croucher. The 19-year-old disappeared while walking to work in February in 2019. Police started searching a house after a tip-off last Monday from a member of the public. Murder suspect Neil Maxwell, who was a wanted sex offender, took his own life 2 months after the teenager disappeared. MP Christian Matheson has resigned from the Labour Party following allegations of serious sexual misconduct. It's after the party suspended his whip and asked him to stand down. An independent parliamentary panel had recommended he be suspended from the Commons after the Commissioner for Standards upheld 2 allegations against him by a former member of staff. The pound is again sliding against the US dollar as government debt continues to climb. The Chancellor has promised to do whatever is necessary to fix finances after borrowing rose to £20 billion last month. Jeremy Hunt says he wants to ensure taxpayers' money is well spent following a spike in debt interest due to inflation. Well, that as high street stores are feeling the pinch, with the latest figures showing yet another sales slump last month. Retail sales fell by 1.4%, which is much worse than analysts had expected. The Office for National Statistics says food stores saw the biggest drop, with sales falling by 1.8%. The figures reflect ongoing concerns about the cost of living, as well as shop closures during the Queen's state funeral. US intelligence suggests Iran has military experts training Russians in occupied Crimea. They're said to be there to teach them how to use Iranian-made drones. Both countries are denying the allegations. On Monday, the devices were used to launch an attack on the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. Ukraine claims they were deployed by Russia. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. Let's head back to Alistair.
Rhiannon, thank you very much indeed. It is 7 minutes past 2. We're into the third and final hour of a Newsday with me, Alastair Stewart, and then Arlene Foster will be with you at the top of the hour at 3 o'clock. The The first full formal day we are in the midst of yet another Conservative leadership race. Candidates have until Monday to cobble together at least 100 supporters amongst Conservative members of Parliament. And of course, the big question is whether or not Boris Johnson will make a comeback. And I'm delighted to say that we can join live now to a senior Conservative backbencher, chairman of the Education Select Committee, Robert Halfon. I don't think that you've declared yet, although you have been crystal clear and even colourful, if I may say so, about your concerns about Liz Truss, particularly her economic policies and the jihadis having taken over the shop, as it were. Have you decided yet whether you support candidate A, B or C, or are leaning towards A, B or C, to pinch Ben Wallace's language?
No, I have declared. I put something out on Twitter not so long ago. I'm supporting Rishi Sunak. I supported him last time. I support him because he's been right about the economy. Everything he said would happen has sadly come to pass, and I don't say that gloating. I say it with complete depression that he was right about what would happen to inflation and interest rates if we borrowed unsustainably. But I also support Rishi Sunak because I've talked to him a lot about education and skills, and he wants a wider curriculum, a British baccalaureate from the age of 16. He did a lot of work to support apprenticeships. And if we really want to increase productivity in our country, we need to increase our apprenticeships and skills as well.
Fascinating. Earlier on, live on this programme, a mutual friend, acquaintance of ours, George Eustis, who I knew a bit when he was Environment and Agriculture Secretary, he also came out publicly in support of Sunak. And it seemed to me there that for George, the issue was one of competence, that what the party was desperately in need of at this juncture is a team that actually get the job done.
Well, let me just tell you a short story that last Saturday afternoon, I met a small business woman, really good person, worked all her life for a small business. She looks at me in the eyes, quite piercing eyes, and she says to me, Rob, I'm terrified. We're absolutely terrified. We just don't know what on earth is going on and what's going to happen to interest rates, the mortgages, and much more besides. And I came away feeling really upset from that meeting and quite angry about how we'd let down these people. And that's why I think Rishi Sunak is trusted on the economy. He did a lot during COVID and helped stop millions of people from facing destitution. We're in a very, very tough economic situation. We have to sort out the mess over the past few weeks. And I think because of his understanding of economics, that he's the right person to lead our country.
Can he recover? And you were on the record saying you'd run out of patience with Boris Johnson. The time came when he had to go. You didn't whisper behind people's backs or behind your hand. You were clear about it. Can Sunak recover from the badge of being the grand assassin when it comes to Boris Johnson? He walked out on him. He stabbed him in the front as well as the back.
Well, just to be clear, I voted for Boris Johnson in the no confidence motion, but I was really upset about what happened over the Chris Pincher scandal, which should never have happened because this guy should not have been put in a top position within the government. But, we've got to move on. Our job is to look after the people of the country who are struggling with the cost of living. You've got business people, you've got home owners, you've got people who can't afford to buy their daily shop because food inflation is 14% now. And our job should be not to argue about who said what and who did what a few months ago, but who is best placed to run the government, understand the economy, get inflation and interest rates down. And that's the decision the Conservative Party have to take, because my real belief is that if we are lucky enough, and I say lucky enough, to be given one last chance, because it is only going to be like one last chance, we have to get it right. Otherwise, and rightly so, the Conservative Party will face oblivion at the next election. But I do think we can turn it around. I do think that if we have a credible economic plan for the public that bears down on the debt but protects essential public services, that when we have tax cuts, we focus those tax cuts on low earners, not the rich, I think that we can try and earn that trust back from the public once again.
Robert, what do you say to those, I mean, perhaps like the small businesswoman you spoke to in your constituency and other people I know that you listen to carefully, and you talk a great deal about fair prices at the pump and all sorts of real cost of living issues that impact upon people's everyday life. If they turn round to you and say, look, Robert, we like you, we trust you, you're our man locally, but nationally, it's time that Labour were given a crack. You've run out of second and third chances, Halfon. Give Labour a go.
Well, I would understand them saying that after the terrible things that have gone on over the past few weeks. It's just been literally the worst shambles in my political life, and I was ashamed to be, to have a government that was doing all these things. But I think that if I say to that person, we've got a new leader now, we've got a credible economic policy, we will do everything possible to bear down on interest rates. It's not going to be easy because, to be fair, they are going up all over the world. American interest rates are incredibly high. There are big problems because of the war, the illegal war by Russia in Ukraine, that's putting pressure on energy prices as well. But if they see we have a credible plan, that we govern properly, that we govern for the people, that we show empathy with the way ordinary folk are struggling up and down the country, I do think there is time to turn it around and, as I say, to win back that trust from the public.
Robert, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. If I don't talk to you over the weekend, have a great weekend, and thank you for your time this Friday afternoon. Robert Halfon there, the Conservative Member of Parliament for Harlow. Olivia Utley and Benedict Spence still here with me in the studio. We've had some crackers that we've had the honour to listen to this morning. Halfon, classic example of what they call a blue-collar Tory, a working-class man who talks to business people in his constituency, knows what it's about and cares what it's about. We have one last chance, we hope, he says, to win back their trust, or we face oblivion. Not defeat, not losing out, oblivion.
Absolutely, really powerful interview. And I think what he said there about empathy is very important, because we're all talking about who the next Prime Minister is going to be. That's obviously extremely important. 3 days later, we've got this fiscal event, the budget, which Jeremy Hunt is due to deliver. If he's still Chancellor by then, we don't quite know whether that's going to be the case. But we're all talking about whether or not it's going to reassure the markets. I think there's a danger, which hasn't really yet been discussed, that yes, it manages to reassure the markets, but it is completely politically unpalatable. What it'll be is, people are talking, an excellent article in the Times this morning, James Forsyth saying it could be the most significant budget in 70 years, enormous tax rises and huge cuts to the public sector, which will be very, very difficult to stomach for people like the small businesswoman in Robert Halfon's constituency. Yeah. And I think with a budget like that, it would be quite hard to get that empathy going again. So I think the new Prime Minister is going to be faced with a huge question of whether to go ahead with that, whether to keep Jeremy Hunt as Chancellor, or whether to create more chaos by changing it up.
And given that analysis that may well have played upon Halfon's mind as well, he declares live here, well, he said he'd done it on Twitter, but confirms the reasons for it, that Sunak, the former Chancellor, the cautious man who told Liz Truss her economics with the stuff of fairy tales, is the man that Halfon wants as the next Tory leader and Prime Minister.
Yes, I think that there is a sense that he would perhaps offer a little bit more stability, because as popular as Boris Johnson is with great swathes of the public, he's never he's never dull. That's the thing. You don't vote for Boris Johnson because you want sort of dull government, steady hand on the tiller, that sort of thing. And whilst Sunak doesn't have the purchase, he doesn't have the pulling power, he doesn't have the brand recognition of Boris Johnson, perhaps that's the attitude is, well, we might have 2 years. 2 years is a long time. If you go back 2 years, you consider the almost complete reversal of the Tory party's fortunes. Maybe we can very slowly, just by being very cautious, cautiously rebuild this. Perhaps we won't win a stonking great majority, but we might give ourselves a chance if we are able to rebuild the idea of...
To avoid oblivion, to quote Robert Halfon again. Thank you both both of you very much indeed. Tom Harwood is still live for us, our political correspondent outside number 10 Downing Street. The address in West London, which this punch-up is all about. Talking to people like Royston Smith and George Eustis and not Ben Wallace, we heard the interview that a colleague did with him, but also just now Robert Halfam. What seems to be emerging here in the studio, and love to get your pick-up upon it, because I know you're constantly talking to these people, is that the acid test will be economic competence to get us through the 31st of October and into some form of promised land. And Halfam said, Sunak's the man who's got that, Johnson hasn't got it.
Yes, that's going to be one of the big themes that people are talking about. But frankly, at this stage of the contest, Conservative MPs are thinking, who's going to save my seat? Looking at the GB News People's poll we saw this morning, the Tories are down to 14%, an almost unbelievable figure in terms of the support in the country in that one opinion poll. Of course, the average of polls is a little bit higher, but the Labour lead is extraordinary. And that is at what is at the forefront of Conservative MPs' minds as they need to make up those minds over the next few days. Just a bit of new news to bring you, Alistair. In the last few minutes, a friend of ours, a friend of the channel, I should say, Christopher Hope of the Daily Telegraph, has revealed that the Mayor of the Tees Valley, Ben Houchen, along with the Levelling Up Secretary Simon Clarke, two Teesside Tories, popular in the party, have come out to endorse Boris Johnson. Now, why is this significant? Ben Houchen is one of these red wall mayors, very popular in his area, won in it with a huge majority, a second term not so long ago. He backed Rishi Sunak over the summer, did the broadcast rounds for Rishi Sunak over the summer, and now, just in the last few minutes, Ben Houchen has come out to back Boris Johnson. That could be a significant moment.
Absolutely. Held by many to be one of the real people of the future as well, whatever the current generation inflict upon one another. Great to talk to you about that, Tom. Thank you very much indeed. I've got to get a very instant reaction from you on that. Houchen, even more than Simon Clarke, frankly, matters in terms of what the party and the country is thinking.
Well, absolutely. And I think the key is how on earth can the Conservatives keep that red wall? And I think if someone like Ben Houchen is saying that Boris Johnson is the way to keep the red wall, then that will sway a lot of other MPs' minds.
But to be fair to Simon Clarke as well, very experienced former minister and current minister, in terms of the economic centre of gravity of the party, his endorsement for Johnson matters as well.
True, but I think actually Houchen is the more important one, because as you pointed out earlier in the show, a lot of the MPs, they're staying in Westminster at the moment, so they're not necessarily taking the soundings of their constituents, whereas Ben Houchen is obviously based very much permanently up in the northeast. So that, I think, might give you more of a sense of actually, a lot of people are saying maybe the public have lost a lot of the trust of Boris Johnson. If if the people in his area are telling him actually that is what we want, well, I think that tells you everything.
I think that's a really big deal. So brilliant to Harwood for getting it, and great to my two guests here in the studio for commenting on it. And if you're sitting there thinking, who on earth is Ben Houchen? If you think of Labour leadership people, you only know Keir Starmer and the rest of it, think Andy Burnham. He is a big player within the Conservative Party as the Metropolitan Mayor of Teesside, and therefore what he says really does matter. We'll try and drill a bit more into that in the final 40 minutes or so of this programme, if we can. You are watching and listening to GB Newsday with me, Alistair Stewart, with more to come in what remains of that final hour, the day after Liz Truss resigned after just 44 days in office, and the race begins again to find a new occupant of number 10 Downing Street. The Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has ruled himself out. Boris Johnson is reportedly making his way back from his holidays to consider his return. Well, in the last few moments, Ben Houchen, the Metropolitan Mayor of Teesside and a towering figure of the Conservative Party in the country, has said that Boris Johnson is his man. Watch this space. More after the weather. Here's the weather forecast for you.
Alex Deakin here with your latest weather updates. The weekend will stay mild, but there will be plenty more showers. Having said that, much of the south will have a dry day tomorrow. Far from dry out there, though, at the moment. This big area of low pressure dominating things. Plenty of isobars on the chart. It's blustery, and there are bands of showers crossing the country. Some of them pretty lively as well. Heavy downpours crossing the Midlands, spreading into eastern England, where it's been mostly dry so far through the day. But those downpours will be quite heavy. Could make a lot of spray and surface water on the roads. More showers to come through the evening and night across northwest England, North Wales, Northern Ireland, spreading into southern Scotland. But much of the south does become dry through the early hours, and everywhere it's going to be mild, double digits almost across the board. So it won't be a cold start to Saturday, and for a good chunk of England and Wales, it'll be a fine start. It's not as windy as today, with some decent spells of sunshine. There will be outbreaks of rain across Scotland and Northern Ireland, but even here, parts of the east of Northern Ireland, central and southern Scotland should brighten up through the course of the afternoon, and some brightness across the Highlands as well. And it's going to be mild as well. Temperatures with a bit of sunshine in the south, 18, 19 degrees. Showers will return to southwest England through the afternoon, and then those showers spread north across Wales during the evening and become much more widespread as we head into Sunday. It'll be another pretty mild night, but the showery rain on Sunday could be quite heavy, especially early on over parts of central and eastern England. This band of rain then marches northwards into parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. Some brighter spells follow, but also we'll see more showers developing through the afternoon. It'll be breezy as well by the end of the day with that southerly wind picking up. But with southerly winds, it means mild air. So again, temperatures will be above average even when it's raining. And in the south with a bit of sunshine, 18 or 19 Celsius. As for next week, if you're on half term, it stays mild, but it also stays fairly showery.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB Newsday and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello and welcome back. It's what is it? It's 14 minutes to 3. You're watching GB News, GB Newsday with me, Alastair Stewart. Boris Johnson is reportedly travelling back from his holiday in the Bahamas to launch his leadership bid following Liz Truss's resignation and the last few, I beg your pardon, in the last few minutes, the Teesside Valley Mayor, Ben Houchen, has declared his support for Boris Johnson, and so too has Minister Simon Clarke. So it's all beginning to develop and move. Ben Wallace, on the other hand, the Defence Secretary, has said he will not be a candidate, but he is leaning towards Boris Johnson. So up in the air, literally the Prime Minister and his wife and children, and metaphorically up in the air his candidature. We shall watch this place. So let's see what they make of it all in Boris Johnson's constituency, Uxbridge, and get some reaction from the people there. And our London reporter who knows Uxbridge all too well, Alice Porter, there she is. So some big guns coming out for him. And do they still love him in Uxbridge?
Well, I have to say, it is the only thing that everyone is talking about in Uxbridge today. I've been walking around and Boris Johnson is the name on everyone's lips. In fact, as I'm speaking to you, I can see people behind the camera who are having fierce debates about him at the moment, because there are some who are really against him as constituency MP, because there have been a number of local issues that they feel he hasn't been strong enough on. For example, we've had the police station closed in Uxbridge. We've had 3 early years centres that have also closed over the last few months, because understandably Boris Johnson's focus has not been in his constituency. It's usually been involved with all the various sort of shenanigans going on in Westminster. However, with all of that, there is still a huge amount of support for Boris Johnson in his constituency. I think, if anything, I think I said to you earlier, absence makes the heart grow fonder, and I think perhaps the turmoil that we've seen over the last 6 weeks, particularly after the mini-budget with maximum implications, perhaps has made some people who maybe felt a little bit disenchanted with Boris Johnson perhaps now feel that he is the right man for the job. I was out and about speaking with people in Uxbridge today about their thoughts, and this is what they had to say.
He was quite strong. He was good. I think he was good. He got us through quite a lot. And then they seemed to kick him out, and we thought it was terrible.
Yeah, I think he should bring back Boris, because people stabbed him in the back, and you can't trust Rigi to be the Prime Minister.
Undecided at the moment, because he made quite a mess of it the last time, and that was the reason he went, obviously.
Well, I think we haven't got much of a choice. We haven't got a lot of people we can choose from, and at least he did try and aim for the common people. And at the moment, I think the working class common people need somebody that's going to be trying to do something for them. And although people had a go at him for other things, I think he did try his best in the circumstances that we had.
No, definitely no Bojo. Rishi Sunak, that's our favourite choice. Let's see. He will make it as a new PM. Let's see.
And why Rishi over Boris?
Well, obviously we have seen the Bojo's this for a few years. Obviously, he hasn't done a great job. Now the Rishi Sunak is upcoming one. He has worked as a chancellor and he has done a great job. So hopefully, he will make it as a new PM.
People in Uxbridge speaking to me there. Now, while Boris Johnson may be popular with some of his constituents, he certainly is not a safe choice, because he is currently under investigation by Parliament for misleading them over issues to do with Partygate. So next month, the Privileges Committee will begin looking at that more closely, and there is a strong possibility, if they is found that he did mislead Parliament, that he could be suspended, and there could be a by-election here in Uxbridge and South Ruislip. So he certainly would not be a safe choice for people in this area, but unlike all the other candidates who may be putting their hands into the ring in the next week, he does have a mandate which could put him slightly above the rest.
We shall watch with great interest, but thank you, and we listen with great interest to the thoughts of the good people there of Uxbridge. Alice, thank you very much indeed. We also asked you for your thoughts on the wild politics of the day. Dave got in touch from Devon and said, I can't believe that British politics has reached such total chaos. What on earth are we currently witnessing? As I've said in the past, the sheer incompetence of our elected parliamentarians is absolutely unbelievable. I am in despair. Well, Royston Smith, the Conservative Member of Parliament for Southampton Itchen, got quite close to what you were feeling as well, Dave, I must say. Again, we've got another email. This is from Trish. Bring Boris back, says Trish. We, the electorate, voted for him and he won an 80-seat majority. He can get the country behind him. The Conservatives are out without him. Well, maybe that's the feeling of Ben Wallace and others who've declared for him this morning before he's even formally put his own hat in the ring. Thanks for those emails. As always with the GB News, we love them, we read out them when we can, and we ask you to keep them coming in. You can do it gbviews at gbnews.uk, or you can do it by Twitter, social media, Facebook and the rest of it. Coming up, we'll be hearing from the former Conservative Minister Tim Louton and the Associate Political Editor of The Telegraph, Christopher Hope. But first, let's bring you up to date with the rest of the day's news on this busy Friday. Here's Rhiannon.
Alistair, thank you. It's 2:32. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has ruled himself out of the race for Tory leader as speculation grows over whether Boris Johnson will make a comeback. Business Secretary Jacob Rees-Mogg is the first Cabinet Minister to back Boris. Levelling Up Secretary Simon Clarke has followed suit. Candidates to succeed Liz Truss are yet to declare their intentions, but former Chancellor Rishi Sunak and the Leader of the House, Penny Mordaunt, are widely expected to run. Those vying for the Tory party leadership will have to secure 100 nominations from the party's 357 MPs. MP Christian Matheson has resigned from the Labour Party following allegations of serious sexual misconduct. It's after the party suspended his whip and asked him to stand down. An independent parliamentary panel had recommended he be suspended from the Commons after the Commissioner for Standards upheld 2 allegations against him by a former member of staff. Human remains found in a loft at a property in Milton Keynes have been identified as Leah Croucher. The 19-year-old disappeared while walking to work in February 2019. Murder suspect Neil Maxwell, who was a wanted sex offender, took his own life 2 months after the teenager disappeared. The pound is again sliding against the dollar as government debt continues to climb. The Chancellor's promised to do whatever is necessary to fix finances after borrowing rose to £20 billion last month. Jeremy Hunt says he wants to ensure taxpayers' money is well spent following a spike in debt interest due to inflation. And high street stores are also feeling the pinch, with the latest figures showing another sales slump last month. Retail sales fell by 1.4%, which is much worse than analysts expected. The Office for National Statistics says food stores saw the biggest drop, with sales falling by 1.8%. The figures reflect ongoing concerns about the cost of living, as well as shop closures during the Queen's state funeral. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.1128 and €1.1399. The price of gold is £1,464.74 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 6,893 points.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB Newsday and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello and welcome back. 23 minutes to 3. You're watching GB News, TV and radio. GB Newsday with me, Alastair Stewart. The resignation of Liz Truss yesterday has, of course, left a leadership vacuum at Downing Street and at the top of the Conservative Party, and the contest to decide who is going to be the person to fill that vacuum is underway. The chair of the 1922 Committee Executive, that's the body representing, or I suppose it's the body comprising all Conservative members of Parliament, Graham Brady, announced that there will be a hustings for Conservative MPs before they begin voting. And as it stands, Rishi Sunak, Penny Mordaunt and Boris Johnson seem to be the most likely candidates. The former Prime Minister Boris Johnson remains a polarising figure within the parliamentary party, however. The Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has declared his support for Mr Johnson, but former Environment Secretary George Eustis has stated that he is not, quote, the unifying figure that the Conservative Party badly needs right now. And the result will, of course, have huge implications for how our country fares across a tough few months economically and in many other respects as well. Delighted to talk now to Conservative Man of Parliament for East Worthing and Shoreham, and that's Tim Louton. And hopefully, there he is. Excellent. Tim, great to see you. Am I right in scratching this old addled brain? You were with Penny Mordaunt last time, were you not?
I was with everybody last time.
There's an honest man. I've always liked you and admired you. Are you with Penny thus far yet?
OK, let's just get this clear. So the last 7 leadership challenges that I've been involved in now, I've been on the losing campaign team 6 times out of 7. So I'm the kiss of death. I am not saying who I want now. Last time, I backed Kemi Badenoch, fantastic candidate. She dropped out. I went on to Penny. I voted for Rishi in the final round. My pitch, and I think this is really essential, echoing what George Eustis has said, we need a unifying candidate. And as far as I'm concerned, there are 4 big beasts who need to make this decision. And that is, of course, Rishi, it's Penny, it's Jeremy Hunt now as Chancellor, and it's Ben Wallace as Defence Secretary. Those last 2 want to stay in those positions. They all need to be party to whoever's going to take over. And if they can decide on that candidate, we don't even need a leadership contest, hopefully, unless Boris comes in and queers the pitch. So I would vote for any of those candidates as long as they can come in, unify the party, give all of those others key positions in a new cabinet and bring in real grown-ups into a new cabinet and get back to the business of governing, which we desperately need to do for the country.
Much Halfen's line just a few moments ago as well. Interestingly, just to clarify for folk kind enough to be watching or listening to our conversation, Tim, and that is that Ben Wallace, you're not saying he should run because, as you well know, he's made it clear he's not going to run, but he has said he is leaning towards Boris Johnson. Can Boris Johnson genuinely unite Rishi Sunak, Penny Mordaunt and Jeremy Hunt? I don't see that myself.
No. Absolutely not. And no, Ben has said he's not going to run himself. Jeremy said he's not going to run himself. So that leaves Penny and Rishi. My point is that those 4 key people need to be in agreement and party, hopefully, to whoever emerges. I mean, Boris remains a big figure, and a lot of people still, their light burns brightly for Boris. But it would be a deeply regressive and divisive step to go back to Boris with everything still overhanging him. He was only obliged to step down as Prime Minister less than 2 months ago. That is not the way forward. I'm afraid it would just reignite all the old baggage we've had in the past. Great character though he is and the great things he achieved, he is not the solution to the current problem that we have.
It seems to me, Tim, and whether it's you or whether it's Robert Halfen or a similarly respected but impartial voice there, You're going to have to read the riot act to the membership, because all of the polls, our own included this morning, showed that ordinary members of the Conservative Party would embrace Boris with a passion.
Well, I'm not sure that all the members of the Conservative Party would embrace
a majority.
Boris with a passion.
I accept the correction quite rightly. A current majority would go for Boris.
I think there are a lot of people who still, as I say, hold a torch for Boris in the party. There are in the country as well. But it's a backward step. We have got to find somebody without all that baggage. And frankly, people in my party, both the parliamentary party and in the wider membership, have got to park their egos, got to park their prejudices against what certain candidates might have said, done in the past, and find a candidate who's going to unify and take us forward. There's too much still overhanging Boris. You cannot go back to somebody who was Prime Minister just 2 months ago. That, I'm afraid, it just doesn't make sense. And I say that, somebody who praises Boris for the great things that he achieved, but completely undermined himself by the whole issue around integrity and the way he handled the whole Partygate and everything subsequently. You don't come back from that. And certainly given the really urgent and emergency situation we are in now, we need somebody who isn't constantly going to be questioned for what happened over the last few months and years. And that would always be the case with Boris, I'm afraid. There is a role for him, absolutely. It's not as Prime Minister in the immediate few months, which is so essential.
Tim, great to talk to you, always, genuinely, and thank you very much for your time this Friday afternoon. Tim Louton there with his view, headline of which, absolutely intriguing. He says, having cleared away the heavy baggage of having backed everyone who's not won so far up to now, but he does say the real trick for Conservative MPs to be mulling over this weekend is to try and find a candidate behind whom, ultimately, Rishi Sunak, Penny Mordaunt, Ben Wallace and Jeremy Hunt can unite. Well, Wallace has said he's not going to run, but he supports Boris Johnson. But Tim Louton saying that all of these leading figures have got to park their egos and unpack their baggage. Really, genuinely enlightening stuff there from a been there, done it man, and a chum of mine, Tim Louton there, South Coast MP down there. Grateful to all of those people who found time for us this Friday afternoon. So lots of names in the frame. Actually, nobody's saddled up and climbed aboard yet. So let's head to southwest Norfolk, join our national reporter Theo Chikomba, who is there, who can give us a sense of what it's like being someone who was there, got to the top of the greasy pole and was then promptly decided to jump off it. He is in Prime Minister Liz Truss's constituency. But how are they feeling? They'll see more of her in the future, but they had their moment of glory having their Member of Parliament in number 10, Theo.
Yes, good afternoon. You're absolutely right. Interestingly, I met one chap earlier this afternoon who said he met her in a pub recently, and he was saying they had a really nice interaction there, seeing her here. But I'm currently in Downham Market, a market town which is around population of around 12,000, and in the southwest Norfolk, the constituency here, where Liz Truss has been MP for a number of years now, since 2010, and it's been a safe Tory seat since 1964. And today, this afternoon and this morning as well, I've just been getting a flavour in Thetford and here in Downham to see what people think. And interestingly, there are people from different political parties who support different political parties, I should say. And here's a flavour of what they had to say earlier this afternoon.
But I do actually feel for Liz Truss. I think it's been a pretty horrible period, and we're in a really difficult period, and whoever takes over, doesn't matter, and the election as well, whoever wins that, it's not going to be easy. So
I've been quite disgusted with the way they've treated Liz, because she's a really good person, and we're lucky to have her here in Downham Market. But I'm very ashamed of the rest of the government treating her that badly.
I think Rishi Sunak had the right idea. We conquer inflation first, and he told the country that Liz Truss's ideas were not going to work, and he's absolutely right. They're not going to work.
Well, as you heard, there are various opinions there. People have been, thinking about it over the last few days and have said the last few weeks has been interesting, but it seems a bit of a mess. Some of the people here are also saying they want their lives prioritised in terms of the cost of living at the moment. Some of them are young, some of them elderly, and just saying, we are in a position at the moment where some people are thinking about heating or eating and having to think about that at the moment. And they just want those in Westminster to take, what's happening here seriously. One lady even said, why don't they come here and speak to us and hear what's happening? So you do get a sense some people are frustrated. Some others are just saying we want to see what's going to happen come next week Friday when the new Prime Minister is elected. But of course, it's going to be an interesting few days when we see who's going to be putting themselves in that hat.
Absolutely. Theo, fascinating insight there to Liz Truss's constituents and constituency there in East Anglia. Thank you very much indeed. That's our national reporter there, Theo Chikomba, giving us a sense of what those good folk feel about Liz Truss and the future of the Conservative Party. Joining me now, I'm delighted to say, from Westminster, is William Kajani, who is political analyst at Star Sports Bookmakers. Let's cut to the chase. I'm known for quite liking a flutter on the GGs, but I try to avoid doing politics. But anyone who knows what they're really talking about always says follow the money. Where's the money going right now?
Afternoon, and thanks for having me. The money is going on one Boris Johnson, and the political comeback would certainly appear to be on, according to the bookmakers.
That I can't quite see on that. I mean, is it odds on yet, or is it just that he's ahead of the field?
It's not odds on yet. Rishi Sunak is still our odds on favourite, but he and Boris Johnson now dominate the betting. Penny Mordaunt has taken a big drift. Of course, Sunak ahead with the endorsements, but Boris Johnson not far behind. And of course, he's just recently picked up Simon Clarke as well. So that's the second soon-to-be ex-cabinet minister on side.
Absolutely fascinating. And I know you can't in this race, because there's only one winner, do an accumulator. But Tim Louton, a Tory MP who knows a bit about this kind of business, said that the candidate who will really win will be the one that some of those names on your whiteboard there can unite behind. If you can find a candidate who Rishi, Penny, Jeremy Hunt and Ben Wallace can unite behind, then that will sweep the field. And Wallace has come out, as you well know, in support of Boris Johnson. But can the Conservative Party unite behind Boris? I mean, he is one of the great examples of Marmite in British politics, isn't he?
He is indeed. I find it really difficult to see the Tory party uniting behind him. I think the pace of events has made us forget just how recently it was that his government suffered a mass walkout and a collapse that brought us here. Now, there's no doubting how popular he is with the membership or his own MPs, but in terms of getting the parliamentary party behind him, I think he's going to really, really struggle because, let's face it, he would struggle, frankly, to get a government together, given how many MPs walked out. And even some of his supporters were acknowledging by the end that his situation looked untenable.
That's also interesting. Final question is a slight expansion, as it were, of my intro to you, William. And I'm genuinely interested to know whether you and your colleagues at Star Betting, whether you're on the phone as much as my lovely guest in the studio are trying to find out what's going on, and the degree to which your own experts sit down, do the numbers like Grant Shapps got the spreadsheet and what have you, who's going to vote this way, who's going to vote that way, to come up with those odds. Is that shouting money at me, or is that shouting political intelligence at me as well?
Well, we have to use both, and I'm very lucky. I've got a great team of colleagues, and we've all been very busy looking at the various odds and the endorsements and just trying to keep up with it just as much as you guys are. So we'll continue to follow it right to the very end. At the moment, it looks as if the momentum is all behind Boris, but things can change very, very quickly. I remember standing on here a few months ago and making Penny Mordaunt odds on to be Prime Minister. So, yeah, don't count your chickens yet.
Great stuff. William, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. That's William Kajani, who is political analyst at Star Sports, saying that leader of the pack at the moment is one Boris Johnson, but not yet an odds-on favourite. But still with me, Olivia Utley and Benedict Spence in the studio. You know, because you watch me jotting down little things as we go along in all these conversations. Thing that got me from William there is that Penny's falling out of the frame at the moment.
Yeah, it's looking as though the things are consolidating around those front candidates, Rishi and Boris Johnson. It seems Kemi Badenoch and Suella Braverman have recently said that they're almost definitely not going to stand too. So it feels like, yes, things are coalescing a little bit. Interestingly, I've just seen an opinion poll suggesting that that Boris Johnson would lose to Rishi Sunak among the public in a general election, which might help sway MPs' minds. If they're voting for Boris Johnson purely because they see him as an election winner, that might give them pause for thought.
Oh, that's a proper YouGov or somebody like that?
Yeah, opinion just out.
Oh, wow. OK, that's interesting. Benedict, I want to, if I may, I mean, you can comment on what lovely William, the bookie, was saying as well, but I did want to ask you what you made of Tim Louton's suggestion there that the only way forward for his party, and he's been in government, he's been out of government, he's taken a principled stance on many occasions in the past. We all three of us know him quite well. He's a good bloke, basically, is what I'm trying to say. But I think it's pie in the sky what he's talking about there of having those four big bears uniting around one name.
Well, I mean, especially as one of them has already said that they're leaning towards Boris Johnson. I mean, it's is that an attempt to sort of get him back on side to try to draw a little bit of disunity in the ranks? I mean, the problem, of course, is, as most people are fearing, if Boris Johnson gets over that 100 MP threshold, then it goes to the members that he will win almost regardless of who else is in that final group. I suppose right now, therefore, the only thing that Rishi Sunak has got going for him is, A, Boris Johnson doesn't get over the threshold, which, it's possible, but it is creeping up towards it. Or that if he does, he's able to put forward an almost a fully fledged team that's already there that makes people go, Rishi is very serious about this. And again, what Olivia just says there, the idea that actually the general public might not prefer Boris Johnson, that it might give members somehow pause for thought. How likely that is, I don't know, but I think it's very crucial, actually, that Penny is up to, I think, 20 and doesn't seem to be moving much further. And there might be that idea that mathematically it's possible that 3 people could get into that final runoff. You don't want to split the vote between people going for Rishi or Penny, which gives Boris even more opportunity to get in there. So it might be the case that she has to park her ambitions, ultimately, and take a seat inside a Rishi Sunak cabinet.
I'm very mindful of how lucky we were to have Robert Halfon live on the programme, and I reminded him of his famous quote about the jihadi lunatics having economic lunatics taking over, which was Trussonomics, that's what he was talking about. But the members of the Conservative Party in the country voted for it. That remains a problem. My final question to you is to comment upon that, and I'm going to come back to you for a final point on how that poll you've just drawn our attention to squares with that fact. First of all, the public like jihadi economics.
Well, of course, this is the great issue with the Conservative Party is that people, they want sort of very good public services and they don't want to have to pay for them. It's the divide. What are we? Are we going to be Scandinavia or are we going to be the United States? And that is, of course, the great divide.
And that's the great debate that still needs to be had.
It needs to be had, and it's very difficult to see how it can be broached without both sides making various concessions. Do they have the maturity to do it? It remains to be seen. People are saying that they won't vote for Boris Johnson and will...
Has Joe Public just told members of the Conservative Party not to vote early for Christmas?
Well, the question was, who should the Conservatives choose as the next Prime Minister? 44% went for Rishi Sunak, 31% for Boris Johnson, and 25%, quite understandably, went for not sure.
And they are, as always, the most honest. Olivia, and before you, Benedict, thank you both very much indeed. You've been watching GB Newsday with me. I'm back at 12 o'clock with my friends tomorrow, Saturday, and again on Sunday. Until then, we all of us wish you a lovely afternoon. Bye-bye for now. Arlene is up next.
Alex Deakin here with your latest weather updates. The weekend will stay mild, but there will be plenty more showers. Having said that, much of the south will have a dry day tomorrow. Far from dry out there, though, at the moment, this big area of low pressure dominating things. Plenty of isobars on the chart. It's blustery, and there are bands of showers crossing the country. Some of them pretty lively as well. Heavy downpours crossing the Midlands, spreading into eastern England, where it's been mostly dry so far through the day. But those downpours will be quite heavy. Could make a lot of spray and surface water on the roads. More showers to come through the evening and night across northwest England, North Wales, Northern Ireland, spreading into southern Scotland. But much of the south does become dry through the early hours, and everywhere it's going to be mild. Double digits almost across the board. So it won't be a cold start to Saturday, and for a good chunk of England and Wales, it'll be a fine start. It's not as windy as today, with some decent spells of sunshine. There will be outbreaks of rain across Scotland and Northern Ireland, but even here, parts of the east of Northern Ireland, central and southern Scotland should brighten up through the course of the afternoon, and some brightness across the Highlands as well. And it's going to be mild as well. Temperatures with a bit of sunshine in the south, 18, 19 degrees. Showers will return to southwest England through the afternoon, and then those showers spread north across Wales during the evening and become much more widespread as we head into Sunday. It'll be another pretty mild night, but the showery rain on Sunday could be quite heavy, especially early on over parts of central and the eastern England. This band of rain then marches northwards into parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. Some brighter spells follow, but also we'll see more showers developing through the afternoon. It'll be breezy as well by the end of the day with that southerly wind picking up, but with southerly winds it means mild air, so again temperatures will be above average even when it's raining, and in the south with a bit of sunshine, 18 or 19 Celsius. As for next week, if you're on half term, it stays mild, but it also stays fairly showery.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB Newsday and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or